Inside a game world, Evan steels himself in front of his nemesis and refuses to back down. He raises sword and shield, yells, "Zeke!" at the top of his lungs, and swears Zeke is the one person he'll never, ever forgive. The camera swings back to a teenage boy locked in his room, hammering away on a handheld console, scoffing at the hero's heartfelt plea. Like it's nothing. Then he snaps that forgiveness is pointless. From the villain's side, he vows they'll all get slaughtered right there, and Zeke's icy stare on his screen echoes every ruthless word. He keeps running into the hero's predictable righteousness, and it still drives him insane, the same old annoyance that always haunts his game. Lying on his bed, a ruthless grin spreads across his face, and with fresh fire in his eyes, he finally decides this last battle ends now, once and for all. His thumb slams down the console button, then Zeke, on screen, gets smashed by a brutal hit and screams as he gets hurled backward. He rockets up to his feet in pure triumph, celebrating that he cracked every possible ending in the game until a sudden, brutal sting hits, and he slams to the floor with a loud thud. His mind crumples into black, and new words pop up, now loading. Then, bit by bit, a lavish, unfamiliar room starts forming in front of his dazed eyes. His eyes burst open, and his stare locks onto a plate of food getting sliced with a fork and knife, held right there by his own tiny hands. Confusion crashes in as his mind scrambles, trying to figure out where the heck he is. Just as his thoughts spiral out of control, a deep voice snaps across the giant dining table. His own father, it seems, asking why he's been spacing out, while the worried woman beside him watches, tense and ready. As he stared at the man and woman in front of him, déjà vu hit hard like he'd seen them before. His new mom snapped that he was 12 now, and he wasn't allowed to act like a kid anymore. Then his father cut in with a grim warning, grilling him like, "Did you really think time was something you could waste? Because once it's gone, you can't buy it back." As he stared into the shiny glass, their voices seemed to bounce around him, and a stranger's face stared back until someone called out, "Zeke," his brand new name. The name hit him like a lightning strike. He grabbed his head as the truth slammed in. This wasn't some random body. He'd become the villain from the game he'd just been playing, Zeke Lagius. His thoughts sprinted, replaying every detail of that game Wish Soul, the wildly popular RPG with a story so deep it hooked you, and combat that felt amazing to fight. The whole thing was packed with lovable, full of personality characters, not just the main hero. But out of all those fan-favorite characters, one name carried the worst reputation in the whole bunch. Zeke Lagius, the final boss himself, the living embodiment of evil. His past was a non-stop nightmare. He slaughtered the protagonist's family, kidnapped the heroine, hijacked the Night Order to build his own personal army, and even wiped out an entire town, like the evil just never ran out. The moment his new identity snapped into place, it crushed him, because now he wasn't just acting like a monster, he was one, pure cruelty, no way back. That gut punch of reality made him stumble back, crashing into his fancy chair with a loud clatter. Then he snapped upright and realized, wide-eyed, that he'd been reincarnated. He flexed his hand and felt it immediately, pure control, and a wave of relief hit him hard. Right then, a maid swung the door open and started to ask if he was all right, but before she could finish, he spun on her with a face full of rage. "What are you wasting time for?" he bellowed. From the floor, his sudden outburst froze the two maids in the doorway, and he barked out an order with an authority he hadn't earned. "Clean that mess up now." The maids could only stare, totally stunned. He reeled inside, horrified he'd meant to apologize, but what burst out was a vicious insult, and he snapped at the maids, roaring that they better not dare humiliate their master. His rage tore through the room, and the maids shook in terror, staring like they'd just seen a ghost, because that cold cruelty hit him instantly, the same way it did with the villain Zeke, and the awful truth slammed home. This world wasn't a game at all. It was real, With a grimace, he crossed his arms as the awful truth hit like a punch, and suddenly the world started yanking every wrong word and action back into place, forcing Zeke's supposed-to-be self to take over. He spun around and locked eyes with his own reflection in the nearest mirror, like the face staring back was a stranger, stamping his new reality for good, because yeah, it was definitely Zeke Legius. He'd tried to fight this compulsion before, but every single time it seized him and shoved him into playing the villain against his own will, and right now was just the clearest proof of it. It felt like the whole universe shoved him onto Zeke Yeager's exact road, locking him in and forcing him to live the same life, step for step. No matter which story path you chose in the game, he'd always run into the protagonist, then get erased by the hero himself, every single time. If this kept going, there was only one ending waiting for him, getting gunned down by the hero. But then he snapped out of it. One fresh thought punched through the despair in the game. Zeke eventually grows strong enough to become the final boss. His eyes snapped wide if that was true. Then he might actually have a real shot at beating the protagonist. He smirks like he's got it all figured out, convinced a little practice is all it takes, while a nearby chicken just clucks away, completely unimpressed. The boy gets shut down instantly, face first into the dirt as a tiny flock of chickens absolutely wrecks him. His sword practice equipment is tossed aside in the grass, and he groans, realizing just how pathetic he's been. Relieved nobody saw his humiliating defeat. As Zeke regains his strength, two maids sweeping a nearby hall whisper about their young master's sudden urge to learn swordsmanship. One grumbling that nobility's whims are impossible to read, and Zeke, hidden from sight, finally gets it swinging. His own limbs is nothing like just pressing buttons. He admits he's totally incompetent, slumps behind his desk, and devours a list of possible instructors. Then his eyes go wide when he spots the perfect pick, a guy named Blinkheart. Hartman flips through the man's file, clocking his past as a former Night Order regiment commander. Zeke snaps the other options aside like garbage, dead sure that surviving his inevitable clash with the protagonist means going all in on the very best. His resolve clenches like steel because he knows the truth. If he wants to live, he has to get stronger. And right now, that means training with his ex-knight, Blink here at the Lagi assistant. Just after that, in a massive grand hall, Blink Hartman is yanked into the spotlight before Zeke and Lord Legius steps forward, introduces him, and Blink slaps a hand to his chest to declare his arrival. Then, Zeke gives him the nod to lift his head and speak straight. Blink lights up at the thought of becoming Lord Zeke's personal instructor, then immediately admits he can't accept it because something stands in the way. And Zeke looks stunned as he hears the refusal. With a heavy, somber look on his face, he spills his reasons about a year ago. His son was struck gravely ill, and ever since, he's devoted his whole life to keeping that boy alive, though the recovery has been painfully slow. As Zeke listens, it finally clicks. Blink tells him the real reason wanting more time with his son is exactly why he ditched the Night Order and came back from the royal capital, which is how this terrifying warrior is even here. But still won't accept the yo. He leaned in and listened as Blink Hartman kept going, the man's voice trembling with raw anguish, because that position felt like a miracle at first until a brutal twist crushed everything, and his son's condition had spiraled fast, way faster than he could have imagined, worsened. He swallowed the swordsman's pain-filled words, and one blunt question snapped into his mind: was this really something money couldn't fix? Solve later in a study, Zeke got a sharper report from his father. Lord Lagius admitted they'd dragged Blink's son to countless doctors, but the boy only kept getting weaker, day after day, until the pain finally tore through him so completely that he was now gone. His father, Nelt, was just waiting for instructions. Yet Zeke, younger than you'd expect, ruled with pure authority, barking a simple command: speak up and spill every detail. Tail Lord Lagi nodded along as the illness's history poured out about a year of being trapped in bed. Yet somehow, the boy could still talk and eat. But it all snapped just days ago when the boy's health plummeted so fast he couldn't even keep food down. And now, breathing itself feels like a brutal, relentless fight. As the grim details slammed into his mind, an answer burst through like remembering his past life. Because he knew the cure for the antidote, they'd need the venom gland of a bastard. Basilisk, when he said it, the room went dead silent. Blink Hartman stared in total disbelief, repeating the word and demanding to know if Zeke was really talking about that legendary poison. Dragon Zeke's own father recoiled in horror, stammering that hunting something like that was pure suicide, begging Blink to stop it, but Zeke still wouldn't. He fixed his intense stare on the desperate father and cut straight through every ounce of doubt, pressing the question, could Blink really choose when just a tiny move would unleash agony on his son? He drilled in until Blink understood the terrifying make-or-break urgency of what was happening. He lays out his proposal with ice-cold clarity because it's a gamble fail, and Blink dies do nothing, and his son is guaranteed to perish. Anyway, those words slam into Blink like a wrecking ball, and all he can do is stammer the boy's title. Zeke doesn't blink, keeps pushing, staring him down and demanding the desperate father admit if he truly wants to rewrite his cruel fate, because the choice, Zeke insists, is Blink. Blink stands there alone then. Blink drops to the floor, pride shattered. The former knight commander throws himself down flat, begging the young lord, "Please." With a sharp, satisfied glint blazing in his eyes, Zeke grabs the moment, then accepts. He spits out his command, "Be at the designated location in 3." 3 days later, the truth drops. Turns out the meeting point is the base of a brutal, desolate Torque Mountains now wrapped in traveling cloaks. Blink fidgets and scans the jagged rocks, then blurts out, "Lord Zeke, when do we get the soldiers?" Zeke snorts at the question in his head because his parents would never throw away real soldiers just for some commoner's kid. And he's pretty sure the truth is even worse. They're so tight they wouldn't hand him a single thing. Even if He stands his ground and lays the truth bare. Reinforcements weren't anything but Blink's own wild hope. Blink freezes in stunned disbelief, yelling that Zeke had been spotted gathering troops. Days ago, his control breaks instantly. The former knight snaps at Zeke, calling his plan pure madness for facing a basilisk with just the two of them. And Zeke fires back, warning Blink not. Don't underestimate him. His voice booms across the mountains as he fires one last chilling question. Did Blink really think he'd drag himself all this way without an ace up his sleeve? He presses, "So did Blink actually. As a plan?" He charged straight at the unspoken horror with razor-sharp confidence. Then he declared he had a plan, and the real win was this: he'd figured out how to survive in this. He said his plan was to claw back control and defy his own destiny, using the one thing nobody else could touch, the rare knowledge a player from the original game alone would have. Maybe they'd finally find what they were chasing, because this clue drove them straight to a bleak, rocky clearing, dead and barren, where the ground was scattered with the skeletal remains of giant creatures, and a shadowy hole in the cliff wall showed the entrance to the... From the cave's suffocating darkness, a nasty growl rolled out. Then a monstrous, multi-eyed reptile slithered into the light, crushing bones and skulls under its brutal, heavy steps. The basilisk had finally arrived. In the middle of the brawl, Zeke snaps a sharp cry and slashes his blade to knock away a thick, dark splash of goo fired at him by a slime-like monster. Then he throws his shield up and locks in with pure, razor-focused concentration. The fight turns out to be a training session. Blink Hartman is barking encouragement at Lord Zeke as he parries, and Zeke can't stop thinking about how wildly his sword skills have jumped, crediting every bit of it to Blink's killer coaching. Just as the training heats up, everything gets yanked to a stop. Blink's face twists in pure panic when he spots a real threat creeping in from behind a student, and he screams a desperate warning to Zeke about the monster. Without wasting a second after the warning, Zeke whips around on his heel, muscles screaming as he swings his sword in a brutal, wide arc and cleanly carves through the ambushing creature. The monster bursts into crystalline shards, and Blink's eyes go wide. His mouth hangs open in total disbelief at how fast and clean that counterattack lands. Zeke keeps his breathing even, then realizes it instantly that was his own basic combo, the cross slash. The danger is wiped out. From way out there, Blink freezes because the boy's skill is unreal. He can't stop staring at the crazy talent, and he's left speechless, wondering how Zeke could possibly hit this level after just a few brutal training sessions. His admiration gets crushed by one brutal truth. No matter how fast Zeke is improving, he's still nowhere close to being ready to face a basilisk. Later, alone at last, Blink sinks into deep thoughts, his face twisted with worry because he feels Zeke's razor-sharp sword talent and knows the boy isn't just anyone. Still, Zeke's real intentions stay hidden, and that uncertainty gnaws at Blink until he can't stop asking himself, can he actually trust his young lord? Unease claws deeper in his chest as he replays Zeke's weird recent behavior, because today the kid slipped off on his own again, and Blink is left staring like, what on earth is he up to? His mind spun in wild circles on one side, the boy's infamous family name, and on the other his desperate wish that his son would be saved, even as the whole tale about some special antidote from magic sclerosis started to stink of a lie, leaving him with nothing but a fragile hope he had to cling to with everything he had. A sudden call from Lord Zeke yanked him out of his thoughts. He snapped his head up, shocked to see the boy himself standing right there. He snapped at the boy right away, demanding to know where he'd vanished to, and Zeke waved it off, saying he was just handling something and, most importantly, Blink had to get ready. Before Blink could even ask what he meant, a thunderous roar tore through the forest, and both of them froze instantly in pure shock. His eyes bulged with terror the moment he recognized the sound. This wasn't just a basilisk, it was one closing in when it was supposed to be miles away. And dread slammed into him like a punch. Fear snapped into rage the second he faced Zeke and blasted him for being reckless. But Zeke stayed ice calm and told the truth. This wasn't a campfire for warmth at all. It was incense he'd lit on purpose to draw the basilisk straight to them. He snapped back at Blink's sputtering disbelief, saying charging straight into the monster's den would have been way deadlier. Sure, the logic held, but Blink still couldn't shake the sick feeling that the boy was taking a cold, calculated risk. Right then, the creature exploded out of the bushes, a huge basilisk smashing forward at full charge. Blink didn't hesitate. He yanked his sword and braced in its way, screaming for Lord Zeke to stay back. He froze when Zeke, calm as ice, strolled right past him and declared that Blink was the one who had to hang back, and the kid barked a tight order. Don't move, stay in your upwind spot. With a cocky smirk and one sharp flick of his hand, Zeke unleashed a cataclysm of dark energy that swallowed the charging monster whole. Blink gaped in shock at the blast's culprit, then he realized it wasn't random at all, a magic mind set loose. A pressure-activated trap springing shut, and that's exactly what had smashed into him with brutal force. He whipped around to the young boy and demanded to explain how he'd somehow prepped all this and even guessed the creature's exact route, while Zeke just shrugged it off, staying ice-cold, calling the deadly trap nothing but a cheap little trinket, barely good enough to deal with lowly cannon fodder, water. His confidence was rock solid. He bragged that he'd slaughtered countless basilisks in game, and that the terrain, plus their predictable moves, were as familiar as his own palm, and right as he talked, today's basilisks started to crawl out of the smoky crater, shaking off the blast like it was nothing. When the monster finally started recovering, Blink snapped his sword up and went ready to strike until Zeke cut him off with a sharp order: back off, stay out of the way, and just guard the perimeter. Perimeter. He froze for a beat, fist clenched around his sword's hilt, and then it hit him. He might outfight this thing in pure combat, but when it came to knowing this specific creature, Lord Zeke was on a whole other level. With his eyes locked on the boy and trust burning hot, he lowered his blade. Then Zeke stepped forward to face the beast alone, and Blink couldn't stop herself from wondering if he had some secret plan up his sleeve. Still, she forced herself to obey. Then he watched as the now recovered basilisk barreled toward the little boy, while Blink stayed locked in, steadying his nerves with one promise he'd jump in the second it turned into a real emergency. The creature vanished in a blink and slammed forward with its jaws hanging wide, but Zeke didn't budge, standing his ground as the monster barreled straight at him. He sidestepped the clumsy attack like it was nothing, spun on his heel, and drove his tiny blade straight into the beast's foreleg, clean, precise, and way too familiar. Almost disappointing. He'd finally cracked the opening. Then he erupted, roaring for Blink to pull back, and the veteran knight froze in shock as Zeke's face hardened into something final. Now was the moment to end it. He snapped out one last warning, screaming at Blink not to stand downwind like an idiot, and the older man, still stunned by the boy's sudden order, could only blurt out what he meant by... Before they could finish their talk, the beast snapped into action, jerking its head back and widening its monstrous mouth like it was about to crush them. Strike right from the basilisk's throat, a vicious blast of poisonous vapor roared out like a storm, and as that deadly cloud surged toward the little boy, Blink froze in terror, sobbing and shouting, unable to do a thing as Blink screamed his name, but the poison had already buried the young lord, completely smothered him in a swirling storm of venom, and he vanished from view. His face twisted into a mask of pure horror, sweat pouring down his brow as he locked onto the seemingly fatal. As the toxic mist finally started to fade, regret crashed into him like a wave. He should have faced the beast himself, and it hit him with crushing clarity. This couldn't be the end. His collapse hit like a truck. He covered his face in despair, the crushing weight of failure swallowing him whole. Then he apologized to his sick son, Luke, convinced he'd completely failed to secure the cure, and the moment he finally crumbled to grief, a quiet sound snapped his focus right as a foot sank onto the damp ground in front of him. Blinking hard, confused jerked his head up, stunned, because where on earth was that water coming from? His gaze snapped to where it came from, and there was Zeke, totally unhurt behind a huge wall of crystalline ice that was now cracking apart. The ice had trapped the poison completely. Blink froze, stunned like, did I just... Magic, he whipped around with a smug grin, daring him to name a single time he'd ever said he couldn't use it. Blink just froze, because Zeke had built that gigantic barrier in a blink, like it was nothing. He paused for a breath and latched onto one key detail. The original Zeke was born with ridiculous talent. He just never bothered to use it, so he could already blast powerful ice magic from the start. And now, with his confidence roaring, he shoved Blink to keep silent and just watch what he was about to pull off. Do? The moment the boy blurted out his declaration, the basilisk snapped into a furious roar so loud it felt like the whole place was shaking. Its all wide with aggression surged, but the creature's rage didn't scare him. He planted his feet, sword gripped tight, and stared it down with stone-calm courage. Facing Blink's mouth hung open in total disbelief. Zeke straight up taunted the beast, and then he lifted his blade as jagged eyes started to crawl into view around it, cold energy snapping through the air like lightning. Lizard eyes locked on one spot as he snapped a single word. He forced the magic to obey, sinking those eyes in and making them one with the... Steel, enraged by what he saw, watched the basilisk lunge ahead, its enormous body smashing straight through. In the clearing, this was all part of his master plan, so he blurted out his strategy on purpose, saying he'd lured the creature into water-heavy terrain just to crank up his... Power surged through him then. He screamed the move's name and slammed the attack down. The ice cross exploded from the wet ground in brutal shards, ripping up the earth as it viciously speared the charging monster. The ex-knight just stood there with his mouth hanging open, utterly speechless as the sheer overwhelming presence slammed into him. He broke the move down with ice-cold precision, just a basic cross/combo at first, until his signature ice magic supercharged it into Zeke's ultimate finish. He stepped over the defeated basilisk and couldn't help but quietly grin. His perfect plan had worked exactly like he predicted. With all that water mana in the air, his power had surged to the level he calculated. Then he snapped his focus to his stunned companion and yelled, calling out. Out to blink, his face tightened instantly, and that childish softness vanished under a cold, confident calm. He said. Blink finally understood how powerful he really was, and starting now, Blink would work for him. Then he pressed for an answer where his terms agreed or not. The former knight commander stared up, sweat pouring down his brow as his thoughts spun. Who was this boy? Without a single hesitation, he bowed his head and swore total loyalty to his. A new lord rose, and out in the woods, peace got ripped apart. Panic screams burst through the air, a warning cut through the trees, and monsters surged in as someone shouted for everyone to run for their lives. For their lives, right as the chaos hit splintered wood and shattered barrels everywhere, and the ruins of a caravan settlement just left to rot. Destroyed amid the wreckage, bodies sprawled across the dirt, and one man groaned through the pain, curled up near an overturned cart, a survivor of that brutal assault. The injured man groaned, fought to prop himself up, and strained his eyes toward the figure looming over him. Then, with barely enough strength left, he reached out and begged the girl that it was all. She nodded to thank her, then stared down at the survivor with zero pity. Just ice-cold eyes as she called out, Atri, and branded him as a cursed, abominable child. After the basilisk hunt, the whole town crashes into the square. Staring at the frozen carcass like they've seen a ghost, some of them can't even believe it's real. While a guild official is left gaping at the beast's organs, solid as ice, wondering what kind of power could do that, then he asks if Blink Hartman was behind it, only for another voice to cut in, No Lord Zeke. The official stares in total disbelief, snapping that the demon child of the Legius family can't possibly be behind this while right beside him. Atri, the red-hooded girl, whispers Zeke's name in shock as the whole crowd erupts into a buzzing revelation. As Blink and Atri walk away, the crowd flips from pure awe to sharp contempt, spitting accusations that Zeke is poaching the creature for profit, calling his actions disgusting and cruel. Zeke hears it all, and his face twitches with rage, because at this point he's resigned. His reputation is already wrecked, and no matter what he says or does, they'll still twist it to make him the villain. Right when frustration starts to choke him, Blink Hartman barrels in with a face full of raw gratitude, declaring Zeke's progress is absolutely magnificent, and that this win just unlocked the exact ingredients for the cure he's been begging for. When the guy blurts out that heartfelt praise, Zeke's mind snaps to one thing, idiot. Blinking, totally clueless about what's churning inside the boy, he keeps smiling and tells him this, the quicker Zeke levels up, the sooner he's out of a job, and he actually sounds excited about it. His words drift over a grand manor-like scene as he drops the good news, thanks to Zeke, his son. Luke is steadily bouncing back, and even his own public reputation is suddenly skyrocketing, even though he insists he never asked for any of it. Zeke stares at how far he's come, and yeah, everything's on track for now. But he tightens his resolve and forces himself to keep this pace, because one slip means he triggers the death flag and plunges into that brutal bad ending he already remembers from the future. Right then, their talk gets yanked to a stop by desperate screams. Two men behind iron bars beg him, "My lord," one cries, voice cracking, "we're in desperate need of your help." Blink whips around, trying to figure out what's going on, while Zeke watches it all unfold. Within Elegia's estate, Lord Elegia shot with disbelief and irritation because Alhe village in the northern plains had sent a direct appeal, and that was wildly unusual. Standing right next to him, his wife nodded, huffing that skipping the proper channels was completely improper. From the peak of that grand staircase, Zeke locks eyes on two men dropping to their knees in front of his parents, begging forgiveness for barging in and shouting that their village is getting crushed by magical beasts, so they demand reinforcements right now. A villager steps up and explains the danger. Breeze weasels, sure, each one is tiny and easy to ignore, but when they swarm together and unleash wind magic, they turn into a real nightmare. His plea gets smashed by Lord Legius's fury. Legius explodes in a roar, calling the whole idea ridiculous, refusing to waste resources on Alhi like it's nothing, ripping into them for barely paying taxes, and ordering them to fix the mess themselves. Zeke grimaces as he watches it all go down, thinking, of course he'd act like this, because Lord Legius, the scumbag he's related to, always pulls the same crap. He stares as the downcast villagers turn a leaf, then remembers those Norden plains were never even in the game he played, so he figures brushing this off won't suddenly backfire on him. But his cold detachment shatters the moment the two men whip around to face him. Tears blazing down their faces as they plead, beg, and cry that without his help they can't ever go back home. He shuts down their desperate screams, blasts out that he's leaving, then Zeke smiles through the murk, pitching it like a brilliant move to boost his reputation, even offering to turn the weasel's pelts into matching scarves for them. His father watches, and a proud smile blooms across his face. He declares that his sons finally got the backbone worthy of the Legia's name, and then he even agrees to back the expedition with a handful of soldiers. As Zeke slips along behind the villagers, he catches their whispers are his help just for show, and a heavy sigh hits him, because even when he's trying to be the good guy, his approval keeps tanking. His father cuts in with one last warning back off if it turns dangerous, and Zeke nods, promising he won't laugh. His trek to Alhay village kicks off now. His carriage trails the villagers' covered wagon, rolling over a stone bridge and disappearing into the wild, wooded country. The carriage thundered down the dirt road, its wheels tossing up clouds of dust as it jolted the young lord toward his so-called mission. Inside, the ride got cut short when a villager snapped at the two, asking why his son was tagging along. So the kid, Luke, stepped up, said he'd gotten back on his feet thanks to Zeke, and begged for a shot to prove he wasn't dead weight. He sized up the boy with a sharp, doubtful stare, sweat beading on his temple. Something about the kid felt crooked, and unease started to crawl over him. Zeke stood there, and then the boy's father snapped in fast, begging forgiveness while insisting Luke was sharp enough to be an attendant. Luke immediately blurted out how badly he wanted to become a knight and swore he'd repay Lord Zeke for this. Zeke mulled over the plea, and the name Luke Hartman kept slamming back into his head because Luke wasn't even there when Zeke played the game. As the hero still, the world felt like it was slipping off the old script he swore he remembered. Yet he decided that if he stayed strong enough, none of it would matter. With a deep sigh, he finally caved. "Fina, do whatever you want." Luke's face erupted in joy, and he thanked the young lord 1,000 times, swearing he wouldn't be led anywhere. The carriage suddenly felt tenser as Zeke sat with his eyes shut, locking himself in thought, and Luke flicked a jittery glance his way, sweat beading on every breath. Luke couldn't stand the silence, so he cornered another villager right in front of everyone, asking why soldiers and common folk alike hated Lord Zeke, especially after his own father swore the man was incredible. Zeke overheard it and, without even opening his eyes, told Luke to wait. Once he truly got to know him, the truth would hit him straight in the face. Luke snapped his gaze back, and his resolve hardened like steel. Resolve. As soon as they hit Alhay village, Zeke didn't waste a second. He strode right up to the village chief and demanded answers about the breeze weasels, asking why the usual docile ones were acting so weird like something was up with them. And it all traced back to the... He listens as the villagers of Alhi, some even on crutches, drop to their knees in pure panic, begging him to save them, while they swear the beasts turned vicious out of nowhere, and no one can figure out why. Then one of them chokes out the blame in a trembling voice. "It's all because of the..." As the accusation slices through the air, another villager lashes out, pointing straight at her, face twisted with panic and rage. He screams that nothing but bad luck has followed them since the day she was born, and it's all because of the cursed girl. Meanwhile, a dark-haired woman with sharp streaks of light in her hair watches the chaos unfold with a calm, calculating stare. The village chief rushes over to hush the man, begging him to stay quiet in front of their guests until the man snaps back, calling the chief out for pretending he doesn't know, and shouting that the cursed girl is always lurking whenever the beasts lose control. Right then, two breeze weasels twitch beside them, snarl with blood splattered everywhere, and act nothing like their usual. No matter how loud the commotion gets, her face never shifts. The investigator edges forward, then speaks in a calm voice straight to the weary chief, demanding he point out the cursed child they keep talking about. And then the chief's eyes go distant as he starts his story. 12 years ago, a girl was born in their village with hair as white as snow. And at first, the villagers just brushed it off as your trade. But when that girl was only 5, disaster slammed down hard. The village storehouse suddenly erupted in flames, and even to this day, nobody has ever figured out how those fires started. In the middle of smoldering ruins, they stumbled on a young girl fast asleep in the wreckage, not a single scorch mark on her, and when they pressed her for answers, the only thing she could say was that she couldn't remember a thing. He goes on, voice trembling with memories, and says that ever since that day, disaster just kept slamming into the villa, one disaster after another. Village. The calamities didn't let up. Crops withered, wells went bone dry, and livestock dropped dead for no reason. The weather twisted into something unnatural, and the beasts went wild. Then the chief finally breaks down, face full of agony, and even the girl's own parents crumple and die instantly. Right at the exact. In that sickening moment, the investigator digests the grim past, and the chief's eyes hardened. Already decided snaps to another villager to grab the cursed child, because she's the only one left standing that day, and that makes her their living guide to the scene of the latest attack. She burst in front of a crumbling stone building, and a man's furious shouting thundered through the air, barking that the door be opened right now. The door swung wide, and her eyes snapped open right there. A young girl in a red hood, Atri, was huddled on a bed of hay, her ankles chained tight in heavy iron. Shackles snapped into place, and her face turned stone cold as a furious villager barked at another man to get out. He tried to argue for her, but the moment he opened his mouth, they shut him down fast and bolted. The moment the shouts hit, the shackled girl crumpled onto the filthy ground, trembling like she'd been. She stepped toward the girl like a storm, yanking her sword free with a sharp ring of steel, and the air went nasty. She didn't just notice the stench, she called it out, and the terrified Atri blurted apologies so fast they cut off mid-word. Profusely, she snapped her apology shut, then demanded why Atri was apologizing for the villagers' stupidity, and the girl explained that as the cursed child, she wasn't allowed to use the baths when. Her explanation crumbled into frantic sobs, and Atri wailed that it was all her fault. Every monster, every village in pain, even her parents' fate because the curse clung to her, and she begged the investigator to use the sword and end her life, swearing the villagers wouldn't dare stop him. Object. She snatched the crying girl's face and yanked her silence with sheer force, then leaned in and barked, "Now you listen here, filth." His eyes narrowed, authority blazing in them. "Zeke Legius," he declared, voice cutting the air like it belonged to the Legius domain. "I'm here to slaughter some beasts." He clamped her chin in his grip and made her lock eyes with him. Then he snapped, asking if she really believed that petty village curse was worth a damn, like he was leagues above all that trivial nonsense. Trivial matters. With her voice shaking like it might shatter, Atri snaps her head up and declares who she is, warning wrapped in fear and loneliness, the demon child of Lagius's dismissive tone slices right through her big declaration. He scoffs at the idea that some demon child could ever lay a hand on him, calling it pure comedy. Then he fires back, questioning why she's even shocked. She got picked as his guide because he's got zero patience for her whining. To him, she's nothing but a tool meant to lead him to the E. She surges to the attack site, eyes locked forward as his name booms in her head. Demon Child, the title she's worn for years now. It all feels empty, powerless, like it can't even stand up to the way he's completely outmatched her. Fear tightens in the air far beyond the village, beneath a sky packed with stars. A strange rustling snaps the silence of the Norton. From the tall grasses, a whole pack of tiny, shadowy creatures bursts out, standing on two legs like twisted goats, their dark bodies splashed with pairs of glowing white eyes that stab right through the plains. Darkness hangs in the air. Then one beast unleashes a silent roar, yanking its mouth wide to flash needle-sharp teeth, primed to rip into its prey. In a busted-up camp, soldiers tightened their gear and geared up for an extermination run, while a young, light-haired investigator lugged a crate and snapped under his breath about all the drama over breeze weasels. He pushed aside the chatter about the Legia's demon child, pathetic, and realized the real problem was Legia's crushed morale and sloppy training. Beside him, his dark-haired partner watched in silence, not saying a word. As she and the red-hooded girl, Atri, stride through a nearby village, the villagers flinch and hiss to each other. Don't dare meet that taboo child's eyes. From afar, two male investigators track them as they pass, and the light-haired one grimaces, muttering about the cursed child. His more cynical partner snorts and tears the idea of a taboo child down as pure backwards village nonsense. The dark-haired investigator leans in and whispers to a tree that the villagers are 100, sure she's behind every single misfortune that hits them. Later, she steps up in front of a hard line of armored soldiers and demands, "Is everyone here?" One booted soldier lunges forward to confirm they're all ready. She turns to the group and declares that Atri, the young girl at her side, is about to guide them straight into the beast's territory. And Atri flinches like the floor just dropped beneath her. Hearing that, the cynical investigator snaps into disbelief and challenges the choice to risk a small child on a mission this deadly while his companion just watches, staring in stunned shock. His eyes tighten as a nasty truth clicks into place like, are they really planning to use the girl's bait after all? The expedition kicks off, and covered wagons thunder down a dusty dirt track that slices straight through a dense, silent forest. In one of the wagons, the dark-haired investigator leans toward Atri and lays out the truth. He knows everyone whispers about her as the taboo child, but he promises those reasons are mostly nothing but baseless accusations. She dug through the official reports, and every tragedy pinned on that child suddenly made sense. Crop failures from relentless bad soil, a well that went dry when the groundwater shifted, and her parents' deaths, which turned out to be nothing but a plain old accident. None of it had a thing to do with Atri, and still, as she sat beside that girl, the investigator couldn't shake the gut feeling that the whole situation was screaming, something's terribly wrong. While she wrestled with her thoughts, the caravan of covered wagons rumbled across a stone bridge and pushed deeper into the shadowed forest. Inside their wagon, Atri's voice shook as she jabbed a finger toward the plains. This was the exact spot where the breeze weasels had struck them before. The moment the girl finished speaking, the investigator's eyes went sharp and narrow. No ordinary breeze, this was wind magic, and she knew it instantly. She screamed for everyone to hit the dirt as an unseen force detonated into the wagon's side. The spell's blast slammed the wagon like a wrecking ball, and Atri went flying, tumbling out with a sharp cry, while the horse tied to the cart shrieked, reared onto its hind legs in pure panic. Just before the girl could slam into the hard ground, Luke Hartman shot forward and scooped her up safely while the dark-haired investigator crashed down right on cue, weapon already in hand, eyes locked on the enemy they couldn't see. She didn't waste a second. Her voice sliced through the chaos as she barked orders for every unit to form up for battle, then shoved them to move and shield the injured non-combatants. Her razor-sharp order snapped through the armored soldiers. One jerked, flinched, and blurted out a shaky, "Yes," while the rest stared, rattled to the core by how fast the attack hit. Their fear was dead on out from the hills. A massive swarm of bipedal monsters thundered toward them, and a cry of despair ripped through the air. They were trapped, completely surrounded. The beasts surged from every direction, and the armored soldiers screamed in panic, crushed by the endless swarm, thinking, "How are we even supposed to fight this?" When panic hit, the dark-haired investigator snapped and roared at them to shut up, calling their whole crew pathetic little weasels, right as a blade cut through one of the creatures. She backed up every word with steel, chopping down another weasel, while Blink Hartman surged into the mess, yelling that the men couldn't falter. "These things were weak," he said, and his confidence caught fire. The soldiers nodded and slammed back into the attack. Under their commander's roar, the soldiers crashed into the chaos, blades flashing as they carved their way through the small reptilian beast. Their victory pumped them up so hard that one soldier bragged they'd erase the enemy without breaking a sweat, but the investigator kept her eyes locked on the fight with a razor-sharp, calculating stare. She admitted the creatures weren't much, yet her thoughts still weren't done. Her worry hung in the air, and Blink Hartman clocked it instantly, calling her Lord Zeke to her face. He snapped that even some idiot could tell something was off, and the investigator backed him up, pointing to the overwhelming numbers and the creature's clumsy, out-of-sync movements. Blink's voice turned cold as he warned the area might have turned into a breeding ground. He spilled his fear out loud. If this unnatural domain was where monsters bred together, then it was basically an overworld dungeon, a monster colony way bigger than they could ever handle. From the shadows, a massive beast with multiple glowing eyes lunged into view, and the investigator gasped. Her focus snapped toward a violent surge of power so clear from where she stood that she could see the whole battlefield, feel a massive rush of mana exploding from the caravan, and realize with a sick drop in her chest that something terrifying was coming. Back at the wagons, Luke Hartman lunged in to calm a terrified Atreyu, insisting they were safe until blasts of wind magic tore out of the weasels and slammed the guards down, and one soldier screamed while another yelled that their match was about to ignite. Magic tore through the air and the attack only got worse. Luke snapped into action, hurling himself over Atreyu to shield her as chaos exploded around their wagon. A horse shrieked when it got hit and crashed down hard. In the middle of the attack's chaos, Atreyu got hit with pure despair, tears exploding down her face as she sobbed, "It's my fault, I'm the cursed one, the taboo child. I never should have left the safety of my chef." She grabbed her head and wailed that she should have never snapped her chain or dared to trust the hope they dangled in front of her, while Luke stood there, swallowing hard, watching her fall apart as she apologized again and again for coming with him, begging him to forgive her. No joke, the swarm of breeze weasels circling them was way bigger than it should have been, packed with monsters that were way beyond anything anyone would normally run into. Luke stared at the trembling girl, and the thought hit him like a thunderclap. She was tied to that unnatural swarm, the cursed child. Then, like a switch flipped, the creatures slammed to a stop mid-advance, and their charge cut off with a brutal... The abrupt halt threw the armored soldiers into confusion, and they blurted, "Did the monsters just lose their nerve?" Right as those words left their mouths, small shadow creatures with glowing eyes crawled out of the dark. From a high vantage point, the dark-haired investigator watched in panic as the breeze slipped away. Then, instead of retreating, it snapped into perfect unison and started moving together with ruthless, disciplined control. Right by the caravan, Luke felt the air twist, then horror hit as he realized those creatures were syncing up their mana, flooding the whole area with an insane, amplified surge. Luke's stomach dropped as the monster's shape started to warp. Its bodies bulged, while it sucked in energy orbs into the moss. And when his eyes locked onto that magic, terror hit hard like he'd just recognized the dreaded air bullet technique mid-crash. He screamed, and before he even had time to react, that swarm unleashed a massive, concentrated burst of wind energy, wham, crashing into the caravan and driving him and Atri to the ground as their horse got knocked down hard. Right then, right as that brutal wind spell was about to wipe out the caravan, something snapped into action from the investigator's spot, and a blast of colossal isolences tore through the air, slamming into a monster horde and freezing it in its tracks. The lances streaked forward and nailed their marks in an instant, blasting the creatures apart and trapping them in brutal, jagged ice shards that froze their advance. Cold air hit, and this shock slammed Atri into full-on confusion, staring at this sudden, powerful force she couldn't even begin to understand. Magic then, out of nowhere, the battlefield turned into a frozen nightmare, with jagged crystal spikes blasting up from the ground and pinning the monster's creatures in place, shattering their ranks. A voice snapped the silence like thunder. Then the dark-haired investigator stepped through the icy wreckage, smirk blazing, and declared it was finally time to show everyone who the real prey was. In this hunt, her words and the brutal force of that display had Luke and Atri staring wide-eyed, completely shattered, and belief, because even hardened veterans froze in shock. One whispered, "Is this ice magic?" while another could barely speak, staring in awe as he blurted, "No way is this really Lord's doing." Lord Zeke, before anyone could finish speculating, the earth started shaking like it had a pulse, and Luke shouted, "Is this an earthquake?" The investigator didn't even blink, saying, "Nope, this is exactly on schedule." Then she added that if the game system played fair, breeding grounds like this always spawned a boss. And right then, a giant clawed foot slammed down hard enough to rattle the air. Right there, right at the quake's epicenter, something monstrous crawled into existence, an enormous, plant-like boss that towered over them, roaring with a maul-like rage and daring anyone standing in its way. Dark-haired investigators tore through the chaos, and her gut feeling was dead on this place was a breeding ground, a whole colony of magical beasts. And like she'd predicted, a monstrous boss had stormed into the center, a colossal, carnivorous plant creature roaring for blood. Her hunch was dead on those armored soldiers got wiped out in seconds, crushed beneath smaller, shadow-slithering creatures. One guard shrieked in pure panic, convinced there was no way they could beat something like this. And the investigator's stomach dropped hard. If the beasts ever hit them with that coordinated strike again, it was game over. The Unison Link was a wild, special move. Multiple users synced up their powers, supercharging their mana together to unleash one brutal, far stronger unified assault. Right on cue, the massive plant monster started siphoning power, its mob glowing like pure doom, and the soldiers immediately sensed it, so they blurted out frantic warnings, too late to stop what was coming. The creature ripped the air open with a brutal blast, blasting the ground to pieces and flinging the armored soldiers through the sky as rock and debris erupted everywhere. While everything spiraled into chaos, a huge, shadowy beast thundered a roar, and one of the battered soldiers screamed for the ice wall formation before they got torn apart. Luke Hartman watched the defenses collapse, his face frozen in pure terror as he stammered, "At this rate, we've only got one choice: run." Beside him, Atri clamped a hand over her mouth, eyes bulging with panic. His panicked words got yanked to silence by a harsh, commanding voice, blasting the worthless grunts to stop their squealing. A sharp command cut through the darkness as the dark-haired investigator lunged forward, blade in hand, and demanded, "Tell me, did you seriously forget who I am?" She pointed straight at them. Zeke Legius, the demon child of Legius. Luke, still stunned, could only blurt out something about impossible odds, a whole weasel colony, their boss, and that brutal Unison Link. He trailed off, but she didn't budge. Zeke nodded as he warned that no threat could be ignored, then dug in with unwavering belief that there were still ways to fight back. When the colossal plant monster loomed, Zeke Legius kept his cool, lifted his sword, and told the beast he'd already seen enough of its act. His face tightens with iron determination as he shouts that it's finally his turn, while those smaller shadow creatures howl and screech behind him. He unleashes a roaring surge of magic and yells, "Ice shot!" As the spell crashes into the giant shadow beast, right then, the armored soldiers nearby burst into amazed cheers at Lord Zeke's shocking mastery. That brutal blast hurls the colony leader stumbling backward, and one of its smaller minions drops instantly decapitated, with dark blood pooling fast beneath its body. Right when the attack hits, the beast explodes with a furious roar, holding back safely, and Atrai's breath catches as she realizes Zeke didn't defeat it. He just lit the fuse. He stays unshaken, clenching his sword like it's the last lifeline, and tells everyone straight up, this is survival, and he won't show mercy. Luke then hurls out an even nastier spell, an icy icicle ant swarm, while a colossal ice spear rockets into the beast, hurtling straight at it. The crowd freezes in shock. Luke's gut screams this spell is a mistake, but the soldiers roar that the spear's so massive there's no dodging, swearing the fight is already over. The smaller shadow creatures suddenly move as one eyes blazing as they lock into a perfect unison link, pouring their energy into a single, terrifying force. With their bond fueling it, the colony leader fires off a brutal counter, an advanced wind spell dubbed Delta Stone. A raging wind vortex crashes straight into Zeke's icicle lance. Boom! And his attack gets wiped out in an instant, leaving Luke and Atri frozen in pure horror as his ultimate spell turns to nothing. He slams Atri's frantic warning aside, eyes fixed on the leftover energy from the spell he just crushed. Then he realizes the mana still hasn't died, tightens his resolve, and tries to freeze all of existence in place. With a chilling scream, he fires an icicle ray blast and unleashes a brutal storm of ice projectiles, smashing straight into the smaller shadow creatures and their massive leader, freezing them solid in an instant. The four full fours summon their magic and slam the giant plant monster shut, trapping it completely inside a brutal, jagged prison made of solid-eye. Seeing this unstoppable surge of power, Atri and Luke freeze straight up speechless, their faces trapped behind that deadpan Estonian mask. The awe gets cut off by a brutal crack ice splinters as the frozen prison blasts into shards, and Zeke just flicks his eyes back with a calm, confident look. Luke freezes in shock, then his eyes snap into analysis as he realizes what's coming, a full-on saturation bombardment. He finally gets it, the whole plan is genius. Zeke clocked that the enemy would lean on their unison link, lure the counter with mid to high tier spells, and then right when that devastating technique hit its cooldown delay, he drops his own wide area annihilation map and wipes the field. Magic, she's perched from a secret spot, a dark-haired investigator staring at the result like it's art, and in that cold look is real respect. Because she knows the brutal strategy, razor intuition, and rare talent it takes to pull off something this flawless. She lays a plan down and slaps a label on the monster's name. Legius's Demon Child. Then, once the battle is sealed, she snaps to her hidden goons the show's over, and they better move. Move out before the fighters even notice. A terrified man cowering behind a tree catches her words, and when the investigators finally pull away, he can't stop shaking as he blurts the one word burning in his head: demon. When the fighting finally dies down, the crew finds themselves staring at a huge manor on the edge of the now quiet village. Village life holds its breath just as they're about to leave. The villagers crowd in, and one man steps forward to speak for everyone, pouring out their deepest gratitude to Lord Zeke, saving them. His voice trembles with raw fear. As he offers the village its deepest thanks, he can't stop muttering about the terrifying demon with the watching eyes, and he cuts himself off before he finishes. Zeke eavesdropped on the fearful whispers, and every word sharpened his irritation. Sure, he'd saved their village, but they still treated him like a villain, and he swallowed that role with grim resolve as if it was the only thing left. Realizing he's done playing along, he snaps around and tells his companion, "We're leaving right now," then strides off fast, then stops short, like he's not got enough. Another word. As he strides on, Atri, the girl in the red hood, darts after him, begging for mercy, pleading with him to forgive the villagers, reminding him of everything he'd done to protect them. She looks up at him, but his answer comes out cold, cutting her off like it's nothing. The peasant's mutterings, he says, don't deserve his notice, and the words knock the breath right out of her for a second. But just when his harsh words sound like they'll cut deep, he slips his own white cape onto her small shoulders, soft, deliberate, and vows, loud and clear, that no matter what anyone says, he'll still be exactly who he is. He lifts her chin and forces her eyes up, telling her, "Don't look down, keep your gaze forward, right ahead." Advance feels like it finally lands in her mind as she watches him stride ahead from far off. Luke and his cynical partner track the scene, and the partner blurts out his confusion, trying to figure out what the cursed child is saying as the villagers scattered. The cynical investigator shoved close to Luke and hissed, "Stay sharp. Watch out for that girl. Atri, she's Lord Zeke's." The moment the warning hit, panic rippled through the frightened crowd. One man barked at everyone to stop dreaming up stupid moves, because the ice demon they fear might not be done and could come back for them next, if they did. Meanwhile, Atri marched on by herself, her face set like stone, clinging to Zeke's words and drilling one promise into her head to look. She looked ahead, then in one sharp, determined move, pulled out a tiny knife and snipped off a lock of her long hair. Light hair fell around her as she pressed the blade and the severed strands to her chest, eyes brimming with tears. Then she stared up at the sky and swore, wordless and unbreakable, that she would become some. Elsewhere, Luke strode up to Zeke, standing there in his investigator disguise with arms crossed, looking like he'd completely lost his way and needed something more. And then he lunged forward, clamped his hands onto Zeke's shoulders, and startled him out of nowhere with a grin so bright it could blind. Luke insisted his performance wasn't bad at all for the future lord's smile stretched as the truth hit. Zeke's terrifying act was just a mask. The disguised Zeke snapped his gaze away, a bead of sweat sliding down his temple, totally thrown off by the observation. Hit Zeke's thoughts sprinted, and he couldn't afford to waste a second on this detour, especially since he was already panicking about how it would twist the main story, because if they followed the game too closely, his own death was about to become a foregone conclusion. His mind snapped into focus, tossing the game's script aside because his swordplay and magic were still so raw. His death was basically inevitable. What he needed wasn't to obey a script. It was real combat experience. So he made up his mind right then and decided he'd do whatever it takes to get much stronger now. But the young adventurer still couldn't shake one question. Where did his path really lead? The dark-haired investigator watched him, her gaze locked on him, steady as steel. The spotlight snaps onto the protagonist as he, nowhere to hide, spills his current situation. He's riding with a tiny caravan, covered wagons creaking and carriages rattling along a dusty road. Rattling down a lonely rural road, the wagon driver whipped around and barked in pure frustration, telling Van to sheathe his sword, because they were almost there. At the village, his order hit the wagon like a bomb. Protests erupted from the back. Van fumbled with his weapon, stunned that they'd even ask it, shouting that the sword was practically. Rage clung to his soul. He wouldn't let go of that sword, gripping the hilt hard as a sharp flash of light bounced off the polished steel. He was a swordsman. With a cocky grin, he stood up and thrust the blade forward. Van, the heart of Wish Soul and the world's chosen future hero. Back in his old life, he was just a run-of-the-mill high schooler who got way too obsessed with a game called Wish Soul. Then fate flipped the script, and the shock still wouldn't sink in. He was reborn as Wish Soul's main villain, Zekalageus. And now, inside his family's estate courtyard, he drills and trains nonstop. That cold, ticking truth he's doomed to get killed by the game's heroes hangs over his head every second, And now he's decided he'll tear through those death flags by becoming impossibly, overwhelmingly strong. With a fiery vow to reach the very top, he throws his whole weight into one crushing swing, only for his practice sword to snap into shattered pieces from the impact. He strides up to his father, Lord Legius, and blurts out the problem his magic has swollen too far, and the moment he channels it, his swords just can't take the shock anymore. His father beams with pure excitement, brushes off the broken sword like it's nothing, and then boom drops incredible news: a dungeon has been found right on their own land. Lord Lagius leans in and explains that dungeons hide ancient weapons and brutal magic items you'd never find on the surface, like a gold mine just begging to be exploited. A jolt of shock hits Zeke. He realizes he's standing in the exact dungeon from his old life. The Legius dungeon, the high-level endgame zone where the ice god's sword, the ultimate weapon, lies dormant, waiting to be found. He instantly spots the opening in front of him. If the ice god's sword can handle his insane magic, then this legendary blade is his ticket to becoming strong enough to fight back against his fate. Right when Zeke's hopes start flying, his father drops a brutal complication. Turns out it's a whole hassle. But protocol says the kingdom's official survey team has to go in first. Zeke groans at the usual government red tape as the team just arrived, and his father immediately swings into introductions. Right then, the survey team finally comes into view, an old man who's introduced as Sage Glance, a stern young woman named Knight Mia, and a bright, cheerful kid called Magician Marks. The survey team leader, an old man with long white hair and a beard, steps forward and calmly commands the room as he introduces himself, and the whole team leans in because it's honestly a treat to meet their quince. Right as he's saying all this, Lord Legius fires off the team's credentials to his son, Zeke, praising Glance as top tier and even noting he's strong enough to advise the Magician's Guild, then turning to Marks the Magician and Mia the Knight as seasoned pros, before sealing it with one thing he's sure they're going to prove absolutely invaluable. But the second Zeke hears the leader's full name, his face locks in pure shock. His eyes blow wide as he silently repeats it to himself, Glance full. His mind races, and the memories from his past life snap into place. Glance Folt, the game's straight-shooting sage, the man of integrity who served in the Heroes Party, and the leader who guided the very first survey team into the Lagius dungeon. Then he flashes back to that brutal survey team from the game's opening. Every single one of them gets wiped out. This brutal moment, the Legius Dungeon Survey Team Annihilation Incident, was the prologue that lit the fuse and kicked the game's whole story into motion. The incident left scars that didn't fade fast. Glance, taking the fall for the botch, disappeared into seclusion, but House Lagius never let it go, hammering him with blame for the failed survey over and over. That non-stop condemnation threw a wedge straight through the Lagius family and the heroes, lighting the fuse for even bigger fights to come. He gets it ice cold, clarity exactly what this will do to his life right now. That sickening realization, another death flag looming, slams him into motion, and he storms onto the balcony, shouting for his father. With a determined stare and a steady gaze, Zeke strides up to the group and squarely faces his father, then drops a formal request: let him join the survey. The words hit the air like a thunderclap, and Lord Legius, Glance, and Mia freeze in stunned silence. Glancefold met his audacious request with a tired chuckle, telling the boys their hype wouldn't cut it, since dungeon runs chew up fresh faces. And even worse, they were already running low on guards. The boy had expected that blowback, and he didn't even flinch. He shot his dad a knowing look and said, "No supervision means every treasure we find turns into a free-for-all for the whole survey team." And the accusation hit like a punch, making his father sputter in sheer shock. Marks's snide insinuation snapped glares onto the two younger survey team members, and the magician bristled, daring Zeke to prove it, while insisting she absolutely didn't need an escort. Court. Even with the team fuming, Lord Legia's grin flared with fresh pride. He'd noticed his son finally snapping into his role as the future head of the house. Zeke stayed calm, then added the real kicker: he'd been planning to get himself a proper sword anyway. And just like that, it was over. Lord Legiah slammed his decision down like a gavel, and Zeke was officially locked in to ride with the survey team. Mia and Marks were left reeling, but Zeke's face went stone-cold determined, because he had 2 missions set in his head to slice through the death flags threatening this whole expedition. Edition first, he set his sights on the legendary Ice God sword. Then he made his real mission the most terrifying one: getting every single member of the survey team out of that dungeon alive. 3 adventurers stared at him, stunned by the sudden seriousness in the 12-year-old boy. Sometime later, deep in the dungeon's cold stone hallways, the team crept forward on tiptoe. Nightmare stayed locked on the boy, taking charge of his safety, then snapped a harsh warning: "Don't move an inch unless she gives the okay." As they trudged along, the young mage Marks fumed under his breath, snapping that the little lordling was nothing but a headache, and warning the sage their lives were hanging by a thread, while Glance only let out a tired sigh, saying it was the Lord's order, so they had to swallow the boy and keep going. Their charge slammed to a stop in a round pillar chamber with no exit, just dead ends everywhere, and Zeke whipped his head around, scoffing that it was pathetic, which only sent Nightmare's irritation through the roof. Miyashi snapped off his remark, shoved Mark forward to investigate, and told the others to fan out while she drew a spell that burst into a glowing orb of light. Zeke stared, clocking it instantly. That simple detection magic was just a willow whip. Her detection spell came up empty, so the survey team just stood there, staring at the dead-end chamber, guessing at the central structure like it might be an altar, while the dungeon's whole vibe felt oddly, stupidly disappointing. As they hesitated, Zeke snapped forward and thrust his hand toward the stone. Nightmare screamed in panic, yelling at the amateur knot. He didn't even look at her. He slammed both hands onto the structure while she kept yelling that hidden traps could be lurking inside. The instant his palms slammed the wall, the altar's back ignited in a blinding burst of light, revealing a massive, glowing, jaw-dropping web of magic. The moment the pattern slammed to life, Mia and Mark froze totally speechless, and the young magician snapped into action, calling it a warp zone and insisting it was exactly the kind of thing you'd expect. Zeke then spilled his plan. He studied the build and concluded the dungeon was carved by a late prehistoric civilization, then warned that regular detection magic won't work because their devices snap into action only when the magic hits the right wavelength. His explanation did nothing to calm Mia's rage. She snapped at the useless baggage to stay behind her, right where he belonged. Zeke didn't even flinch. He just strode past her, heading straight toward the glowing. The portal loomed, and his quiet defiance lit a fuse in Mia's chest. She snarled with frustration, convinced he'd stumbled into the warped zone by luck, and now strutted like a hotshot, while Sage Glance stared beside her as a sharp, chilling unease snapped into the sage's gut as he watched the boy's back, because seriously, where on earth had Zeke Legiah gotten brains like that? The questions piled up fast, and he couldn't stop wondering what kind of person the boy really was. Zeke burst through the portal and cut him off mid-thought, then screamed "Ice shot" and blasted jagged ice shards everywhere. Forward, he barrels deeper into the dungeon, leaving his companions in the dust, and they're stuck staring while he single-handedly sets off a pressure plate that was clearly built for 3 people. Without missing a beat, he saunters past a trap built to slam intruders from above, then moves straight to a stone puzzle, clicks the blocks into the exact stacking order like it's nothing, while the magician's Marks linger in shock, seething with hate. As they trail after her, Nightmare blurts out her confusion to Marks, staring at Zeke like he's got a key to the place, and she can't help wondering if he's actually been in this dungeon before. Right then, Mark looks just as lost as before, but Sage Glance cuts in and declares that Mia's theory is totally wrong. Then he calmly tells them both to look even closer, right now, at the same time. Zeke tries to hold himself together as the sage lays out his reasoning, but Zeke can barely stay upright. His stamina is getting shredded fast, and the way he's slipping is exactly the kind of mistake a true location expert would never make, which makes the tension spike even higher. Question. Like he's on cue, Zeke flicks a look over his shoulder, sharp as a blade, and calls them out, questioning whether it's really nice to just wander and chat, acting like they've got all the time in the world like it's all sunshine on a picnic. But then it clicks. Those harsh words aren't accidents. He's pushing everyone back on purpose. Still, he's always the one who grabs the lead, never once letting his guard down. This contradiction makes the sage's stare lock in, and his eyes widen a little as a shocking new possibility starts to click into place. In his head, Zeke walks on, totally blind to the sage's sudden realization, while he glances back at his crew trailing him and size-ups them in silence. Are unstoppable. He keeps drilling into his internal analysis, while Nightmare never once breaks her focus, staying locked and loaded for battle. Magician Marks keeps her detection magic running non-stop, with not a hint of fatigue. And then there's Glance, whose magic flow never wavers and whose composure stays flawless. He goes quiet, staring at his companion's terrifying skill and realizing, they'd probably made it this far without his help. But that realization slams him with a nasty question from the game. How could talents that elite possibly have failed to? Wiped out his thoughts spinning when Magician Marts voices the same uneasy feeling, turns to him with a sharp, questioning look, and asks why they haven't run into a single magic beast yet, leaving him stuck as his own face says, "What?" Her question hangs in the suffocating quiet of the corridor as he and Sage Glance press forward. And he quietly agrees because even with him disarming every trap in their path, the total absence of monsters feels deeply wrong. Totally wrong. Everything he knows from the game slams into his head, painting what should be here, because the dungeon was meant to be packed with brutal enemies, from hulking horned bees to skeletal. The star flickers in his memory, and suddenly the world feels wrong, like a brutal premonition just snapped into place, deep in his gut as that dread keeps creeping in. The moment they push through that archway into a giant open chamber, the dread slams into him and hardens into a terrifying certainty, like they might have already walked straight into a trap. As if it's a death trap, he whips his gaze to the room's center, and his eyes explode wide with sudden horror. Recognition hits him like lightning. There, on a stone dais, soaked in swirling mist, rests a magnificent blade, and he knows it instantly, the legendary Scotsword. The magician gasps, eyes wide at the insane magic pouring off the blade, calling it a treasure. Then she rushes closer, and Zeke's mind erupts with panic. Everything's gone terribly wrong. No time to explain, he lunges forward, slams the marks into the stone with a roar, and yells, "Don't touch it!" Right after that, a colossal blast of frigid energy erupts from his sword, frosting the dais in a deadly, jagged ice crackled underfoot. He'd seen this coming. As soon as he imagined it, Sage Glance thrust his finger at him and blared his name. The old man lunged to hold Nightmare back, but she was already screaming at Zeke and disbelief. Before she could push the question, he yanked her arm hard, staring straight through her with ice-cold focus. Then he asked, point-blank, if she didn't get it. He was trying to protect them. Mia, stunned by his intensity, could only choke out a "Yito." As they talked, the ice god's sword started crackling with wild, unstable power. Magician Mark stared, then snapped her gaze back to the sage, her face twisting with pure confusion as she questioned what he was doing then. Boom! The stone floor under Zeke's feet shattered open and dropped out from under him, and he spat out a curse as the trap finally snapped shut. The ground gave way the fall tore them down into a pit below, and when the dust cleared, a colossal, razor-detailed magic circle was revealed, carved into the chamber's real floor and surging with an immense living curve. Crackling power surged in the air while his companions on the ledge could only gape, their faces frozen in pure shock and horror at what they were seeing. The whole scene unfurled right in front of them. Then, straight from that blazing circle, a massive horned monster erupted into the light, swallowing it up as an archdemon finally showed its true face, looming over the lone boy. In a huge circular stone chamber, a monstrous archdemon tears itself into existence, dark armor, massive wings, and a shadow big enough to crush hope, while the adventurers freeze in shock as Sage locks eyes with it, realizing it's the legendary creature he swore was just a story. And Night Mia grips her sword and snaps everyone to move carefully. Before Zeke can even finish forming the plan, he lunges forward, thrusts his hand out, and unleashes his spell. He yells, "Icicle Lance ×3," and rockets 3. Razor-sharp ice bolts straight at the towering demon. Zeke's wild move snaps Mia into a furious rebuke. She demands to know why he's charging in alone instead of fighting it safe. But Zeke doesn't flinch. He knows exactly what he's doing. That first hit isn't to take the beast down. It's pure scouting, a way to read the enemy and measure what it can really do. Ice lances crash and splinter into nothing against the glowing magic circle the archdemon summons, and it doesn't even flinch completely. Unscathed, Magician Marks gasps in pure shock, while Zeke locks in with wide eyes, heart pounding as his mind scrambles. Does this monster have some kind of anti-magic trick? He snaps to the truth in an instant. An archdemon, a rare special event monster from the game he used to obsess over. He remembers how brutal it was, the real nightmare where every fight reshuffles its attack patterns. There's no mistaking it now. This is the kind of enemy that crushes you. As it finally clicks, the archdemon hammers its colossal fist into the stone, blasting the ground to pieces, while Mia's gauntlet tightens hard. Fury pouring from her voice as she realizes this monster is the same one that wiped out the original survey team. That shockwave tears through the chamber, blasting the tiny magician across the room and scraping marks into the floor with every desperate skid. Zeke can only stare in horror as she gets flung through the air, utterly helpless. Mia shrieks her companion's name in pure terror, and right as she lunges at that brutal stone floor, Marks gasps in agony. She slams onto the ground and Zeke's blood runs cold. She's down from one brutal hit. Glance barks at her to stop, but Mia clenches her jaw, refusing to back down. If magic won't save her, then she's going in with her blade instead. She snaps past the sage's desperate plea, lunging ahead with her blade blazing, then unleashes her ultimate peerless sword dance. Her sword slams into the archdemon's barrier, and wham, the blow gets instantly swallowed, repelled with a brutal, deafening crash. The dark-haired investigator stares, stunned, realizing this monster doesn't just shrug off magic, it blocks physical attacks too. The spell lands and the hit knocks her back hard onto the stone floor. Right as she tries to recover, Marks surges up behind her, already back on his feet from that earlier blast. She shoots a hand forward, slams into a brutal incantation, and summons Ignis, the King of Flames, to torch their enemy. Her spell erupts into a raging fire spirit vortex and swallows the archdemon whole, and the investigator's eyes widen. He can tell this isn't her ice magic at all. It's a totally different kind of power. The fiery assault crashes in vain as the archdemon summons a third shield, then it towers over Sage Glance. The sage dives from the ground to meet it, and Mia screams a desperate warning. The sage snaps his grip tighter on his staff, knuckles going white as he pours an insane amount of power into it. He hoists the glowing staff over his head, eyes locked in laser-focused resolve, ready to smash down with his full power. He drives the staff down with a brutal slam into the ground, unleashing his technique and shouting the evil-defying, shattering flash. Mia and the investigator instantly spotted the sage's signature move, a special attack packed with every element, and that concentrated blast rips toward the archdemon's head. Exactly the hit the sage swears will end it for good. The impact detonates a brutal burst of dark energy, blasting shattered stone through the air as the shockwave pounds outward while Zeke stands watching from afar. But when the smoke finally thins, the archdemon is still standing untouched, unbroken. Dark steam curls off its form, and the sage's ultimate attack just fizzles out like it never even landed. But as the dust from that massive spell finally settled, Nightmare and Magician Marks blew up in celebration, convinced their combo attack had crushed the enemy, while the dark-haired investigator froze, horror twisting her face as she blurted, "No, that's not true." Their joy lasted about 2 seconds because the archdemons were left completely unhurt, the final scraps of that spell fizzing out harmlessly against their form, and the whole party just froze in stunned silence. The dark-haired investigator instantly understood what they were really seeing, the demon's true power. From his crazy vantage point, Zeke Legius's mind sprinted as he cracked the phenomenon. Those layered shields weren't just tough, they were tuned to wipe out every hit, whether it came as steel or magic. Armed with this new truth, the Dark Air investigator roared a warning to everyone an enormous attack was about to crash in, and their only shot was to shatter those shields, and when the archdemon finally loomed over them with its maw hanging wide, the whole party panicked into defense, slamming up an ice wall and a powerful magical barrier. The demon ripped open its hand and blasted a concentrated wave of energy so brutal it smashed their crude defenses to bits, blasting the sage's gaze and the magician's marks flying through the chaos. Debris crunched as she hauled herself up, gritting through a brutal groan. This dark-haired investigator's body was wrecked, aching everywhere she just stared, stunned out of her mind at how insanely powerful that creature was. Right as they could barely catch their breath, the archdemon started stacking power for a fresh slaughter, and the battered heroes knew there was no way in time to dodge it. In that do-or-die moment, Sage Glance ripped off what was left of his robe, flashed a savage, muscular frame, and threw himself in front of his friends, arms stretched wide like a living sheep. Shield. He planted his feet and stood his ground, while the dark-haired investigator snapped and demanded answers. What was he doing? Right beside him, Nightmare's fury flared as she scoffed that it was straight-up laughable to call herself a knight if she couldn't even guard one helpless child. The child. The sage didn't even blink. He just tilted his head to glance back at the investigator, then calmly called her Lord Zeke, and let slip that he has a grandson his age. He thrusts a faceted, crystal-like shard at the dark-haired investigator. His hands scraped raw, and orders her to grab it and run. She freezes, instantly recognizing the thing and snapping into shocked understanding. It's an ancient relic, a warp orb, and when he talks, he makes it sound deadly real. It can yank whoever holds it to any spot within its range. Then he grimaces, wishing they'd grabbed more, because this one only goes for a single person. The moment she hears it, the magician's eyes flare, and she starts carving words into the air, voice cutting through disbelief, accusing him of being insane and refusing to let him slink off alone. He snaps back that someone has to bring the intelligence they've piled up, or else their entire disastrous mission will have been for nothing. Nothing. The grim truth of it hits like a hammer, he speaks, and she clutches her chest, blood spilling from her lips as Nightmare fights to keep standing behind her. The investigator stares them down. Her face, Sage Glance, strides forward, squares up to the looming archdemon, and admits they're all running on fumes, including him. But then, with iron certainty, he declares he knows exactly how to take that beast down. Down his crushing confidence boxes the investigator into a brutal choice, and as fear claws at her chest, she can't stop herself from screaming inside, is ditching everyone to save her own skin. Really, her only way out. Glance sensed her turmoil and spoke over his shoulder, voice calm but iron steady. Don't stress. He plants his hands on his knees and clenches through the pain, muscles shaking as he finally smiles and drops the truth. They've got one last ace left. She presses the sleeve to her eye, and the investigator freezes, sweat pouring down her face as she's totally lost, then blurts out, "What in the world are you trying to say with an A?" Base stares back then, Mia and the Marks bolt into action, and the three warriors burn through their last reserves as their weapons slam together in a blinding flash for one final, combined technique. The unism. The investigator spots it instantly. The technique being set up is unison link, a top-tier move where multiple people sync their magic together to blow their collective power sky high. Power surged as she shoved herself upright, and Knight scoffed through the air, then threw up his magician's marks and mocked them as pathetic excuses for fighters. She snapped back that, if that's how it was, she'd stop relying on anyone else and prove she could do it with her own power. There's still a way. Marks opened his mouth to respond, but it cut off mid-sentence. Stunned what? Then the investigator's eyes flare with raw power as she slams her technique straight into the moment. Unison link, a brutal burst of energy crashes down, swallowing the whole party at once. Mia and Marks scream in shock and agony, begging to know how she just shoved herself into their synchrony. Sage Glance gapes in total disbelief, years of brutal training to perfect unison link, and this newcomer just barged in like he owns the place. The investigator shoots him a smug look and asks if he honestly thinks even a bunch of idiots could pull off something like that. With the link now locked under her control, she whips around and stares down the archdemon. Then the investigator shouts that it's time to flip the script, and with one final, "Let's go," she charges first. 9 shields wrap the archdemons like an unbreakable fortress. And though every enemy opponent was a top-tier fighter, even their deadliest moves still couldn't crack those dark barriers. Just when it looked like they were totally trapped, the investigator's eyes sharpened. She finally saw it. The fact that every attack bounced back was the exact hint she needed to find a way to break through. With this new clarity, the party surged back to life. Sage Glance, battered but unbroken, stood firm and shouted that it was finally time to unleash their counterattack. He admitted the plan might fall apart, then muttered that their combined power, supercharged by the unison link technique, could carry them just how far. A forgotten warning snapped back into their mind. Use the teleportation orb to bolt the moment the fight turned sour, because that voice was furious, basically yelling at them to stop stalling. But the investigator's eyes burned with grim determination, and she shut that idea down. She was positive they wouldn't need any escape route. With the unison link driving her power, the party's magic erupted like a wildfire. Magician Martz even admitted she never could have pulled off a feat like that before. But now her boosted strength made it possible. She slammed her palm into the ground, and a blast of raw energy tore through the stone. Roaring to life as the Flame Emperor Phoenix, a colossal creature of fire. The fiery beast charged in like a comet, smashing straight into one of the archdemon's shadowy shields, while Marks drove her will through the phoenix, screaming it to incinerate every last one of them into ash. Nightmare and the investigator could hardly believe it. This unbreakable barrier crumbled, and the archdemon's shield just melted away as those flames slammed in with unstoppable force. The combined magical force hits dead center, blasting apart one of the archdemon's 4 defensive barriers. First shield shattered. When the shield finally shatters, the investigator realizes what their power truly can do. The unison link doesn't just boost strength, it lets them bypass the shield's special defense, one that only breaks when 2 attackers hit at the exact same time. They fuse all 4 of their forces into one crushing, unified strike, and when Van sees it, he tightens his grip on his weapon, roaring that with only 3 shields left, it's finally his turn to launch the attack. Before Nightmare even breathes, she rockets forward like a living shadow, charging the archdemon by herself while the dark-haired investigator snaps in panic, screaming at the reckless knight to stop. She snaps her gaze back, fury blazing behind her eyes, and yells at Van not to underestimate her because right now she feels unstoppable. The archdemon smirks to himself, sure one lone fighter can't possibly do a thing, until Mia rockets closer with impossible speed. And the investigator just stares, frozen in shock, realizing this has to be another unison link trick. In a sun-dappled forest, a blazing white unicorn with one shining horn rips through the trees on thunderous hoofbeats, blasting forward as it flees, As it bolts away, Luke Hartman, eyes locked on the sky, launches into a point, slamming his finger after it to tell a dark silhouette that the beast went that way. Then he snaps, "I don't need to be told." Zeke Lagius, 15, now stands before the unicorn with nowhere left to run, jammed against the cliff face, and just calmly tells it, "You're trapped," a smirk tugging at his lips as he wonders if it's finally going to fight back. The unicorn snaps up the challenge, rockets forward, and drives its horn straight at Zeke, who braces like he's about to take a hit to the soul. Then, bam, light explodes as horn slams into his defense. He smirks and taunts the creature, asking where it's even staring as frost crawls along its horn. Then the unicorn, sure it landed the hit, erupts in a triumphant neigh. But the creature's confidence is dead wrong. Its strike makes the unicorn shatter into cold, glittering ice, proving it was just a fake. Zeke stands right there, unfazed, and spits that the legendary beast is pathetic for falling for something that simple, while the real, unharmed unicorn rears in shock. Right when the unicorn freezes in shock, Zeke whips out his segmented blade and slashes through the air in one crisp arc. Then Luke Hartman pops up behind him, grinning like, "So you're really a softie after all, huh?" Luke Hartman, now 15, lifts the prize high, the unicorn's horn perfectly cut off. With a shock, a stunned Zeke hears how clean the blade was, so clean the unicorn didn't even get hurt. "You nailed it. The horn came off clean and bloodless, because that flesh was just in the way of the real goal." Luke shoots a sly wink, and just like that, he's proven his point down the distance. The unicorn that's now hornless bolts away, totally unhurt, racing for freedom. He raises the severed horn like a trophy, grinning wide, and tells Zeke that sparing a rare magical beast, even with that nasty attitude of his, shows he's overflowing with compassion. Zeke can't stop thinking about how hard it hit him. Blink Hartman's son, the kid he saved from magic sclerosis, had latched onto him so tightly over the last 3 years. He strides alone along the waterline, shutting out the world as his thoughts turn inward. Luke might get loud and annoying, but his real worry sits somewhere else entirely. Suddenly, a skeletal arm rockets out of the water, bony fingers snapping shut on his neck and shoulder, yanking him backward with shocking strength. With that skeletal monster clamped onto him, it finally clicks. Yep, the death flag from a game plot is still live. It all began that day he snagged the demon sword in the dungeon. Then a voice thundered inside his head, ancient and iron-strong, calling itself the demon sword of Legaeus, bound by a covenant to the very last of the Legaeus bloodline. His mind spun out of control with that shock, because he couldn't even remember that demon sort of Legis from the game, and the word covenant meant nothing to him then. Luke's voice suddenly cut through his panic, bright as day, saying he'd be right back and that Zeke should catch up. The sword's voice hits again, and a wave of darkness churns through the blade in his grip. Then it yanks control from him, roaring that he's forced to be Zekalegus now. A nearby kid gapes in panic, yelling, "What's happening to that sword?" And Zeke's own eyes go huge with a colder terror because those weapons somehow already knew exactly who he really was. He snaps out of it. This isn't about who he is. The real horror hits hard. No matter what he means to do, Zeke Legaeus's cruel story drags his every action into shape. Despair slams into him and he snaps a hand over his mouth, unable to even say the truth out loud. A cold, creeping premonition sinks in. If this curse keeps going, it'll lead straight to his death. Zeke Legius lay crushed beneath that skeletal monster, his thoughts spinning out of control, while the demon sword's voice boomed that, by the game's rules, he was destined to die. So he screamed in total disbelief, yelling that he'd done everything differently just to dodge this exact fate. He rattled off everything he'd done, training like crazy, studying sword skills under a night, even dodging trouble with one sharp glance, and swore he'd nailed it all until the sword cut him down. With his memories missing, it said, death is unavoidable, and those memories aren't gone. They're sealed away. The sword flashed its purpose as Zeke stood there, gripping his blade, those nasty memories. the ones that force him to play the role of Zeke Legias, have already been exposed. The seal snapped into place, and the chilling truth hit him. His role in the game could only be one fate standing in front of the protagonist and getting crushed. No matter what cold dread flooded his whole body. Dread surged, then the sword dangled a deal. Give up those missing memories, and it would pour power into him. The blade ignited in a brilliant flash, pulsing like pure energy with every beat of his fate. The voice called him the final of the Lagea bloodline, thrusting the underworld eyes into him, eyes that could see death and daring him to fight fate itself. A shock ripped through his body, and just moments later, Luke Hartman showed up, pointing out that Zeke had been missing for a while. While Luke's voice barked that he was a filthy knight from the bushes, Zeke tuned it out, eyes locked on the sword in his grip, trying to figure out what kind of weapon it really was. Then, the other boy burst out, peppering Zeke with questions about the powers and the underworld eyes he'd overheard. And when a weird pattern flickered in Zeke's own gaze, he froze because the sword suddenly went silent, making him wonder if it was even real, or just some scrap from a game. Then, sometime later, the two tore through a rocky pass, and somehow each kid hauled a defeated monster's entire skeleton, strapped tight to their backs. Suddenly, no warning at all. The skull on Luke's back spun its head, and those empty sockets locked onto him. Luke's face crumpled with raw terror, as Zeke, just ahead, snapped around with wide-eyed panic. Shock slams into him. He yells at the creature to stop as his thoughts thunder. He guesses it's some kind of reaper, a thing that senses death, but that theory crumbles the moment he asks a simple question. If that's true, why can everyone else see it? His senses suddenly shriek like alarms, and he roars, "Don't move!" Luke, a tall, bare-chested man, and a dark-haired woman instantly freeze, totally thrown off by his warning. The moment the command hits, they snap into action just in time, because the instant the hillside gives way, the whole ground buckles with a deafening roar, shattering into a brutal cascade of rocks. Earth, she just stands there staring at the wreckage and blurts out, "Is this a landslide, or did what we did somehow trigger all this damage?" "In the dungeon?" she asks, and her question gets swallowed by silence as Luke whips around to Zeke, praising his razor-sharp observation. The tall man nods and says it loud. Zeke saved them, while the woman stares in disbelief at his incredible intuition hits hard, yet even with all their praise, Zeke's mind is locked on something else. The tall man notices the Reaper is gone, and Zeke can't help but wonder inside if its disappearance is exactly what happened after they managed to dodge it successfully. Death. He freezes, staring at his own fate, and then the realization hits. Ever since he was handed those eyes that can spot death flags, the demon sword of Legias has stayed. Silence hangs in the air, then his eyes lock on Luke, marching ahead, and he still can't figure out which memory is missing, so he grabs onto one plan. Hard. Fresh determination surges in his chest, and he decides he'll just keep dodging that death flap no matter what. Acts. He figures that in a mess like this, it's basically standard procedure to accidentally trigger some hidden mission, and that's exactly what unlocks his memory. Memories hit hard, so hard that Zeke gets swallowed by his strategy and doesn't even notice Luke's worried stare. When Luke asks, "You okay?" Zeke just tells himself his plan will probably work out. He suddenly froze mid-thought, and a realization hit him like lightning, fully settling over his face. His face shifted right in front of them, and even his dark-haired companion, exhausted as she was, snapped her eyes his way with a tired, sideways look. When Zeke lit up with that big grin, she couldn't help it. Some part of her thought with just a little irritation, "Wait, is he important too?" Character. This thought tore at him like a siren in his skull. He had to remember everything, no matter what, or he would snap fast. Their journey finally slammed them into a huge, jaw-dropping building in the next town. And that's when the adventure really kicked off. Inside, the whole group crowded up to the counter when the reception staff slapped down a gnarled, spiraling object. Luke Hartman's eyes went wide as saucers, and he blurted that it was a real unicorn horn, bragging that catching even a flicker of its glow was insanely rare. Limsa One's dark-haired companion shot the nervous receptionist a hard, stern stare, and she snapped that she won't take requests she can't finish while Zeke begged her not to be so scary, and Luke just stood there. He simply laughed. And then Luke stepped in shooting a confident grin at the receptionist, saying, "Zeke gets judged wrong, thanks to that sharp tongue. But deep down, Zeke is more righteous than anyone." "Knows, yeah," and the flustered receptionist stammered it out. "Guess that's how Zeke rolls. He treats everyone the same." Then the dark-haired woman shot back that Luke actually managed to make him say that. Their chat got ripped apart when another guild employee cut in, excuse me, and announced that a new client was calling for you by name. Luke snapped his gaze up, shocked. "US." He pressed for details. The employee snapped back the answer and said the client was waiting back in the room, so they'd made it crystal clear they wanted that duo after their recent exploits had been particularly remarkable, because for the last 3 years, Zeke's been grinding as an adventurer, hunting subjugation quests to pay his own way and sharpen his fighting. Now, as he and Luke climbed a towering staircase, he muttered that this was the first time they'd ever been asked. By name, Luke nodded and admitted it was a rare sight, then leaned in and told their companion that he'd been slipping along with Zeke for his own reasons, and now it's basically a two-man team. Then he shoved his hands behind his head and muttered that the client should have bailed the second they realized he was tied to the infamous House Lagias, and from behind, Zeke just shot back, dry as dust. "So, you want me to tuck you back in?" Permanently, she's the dark-haired companion, and suddenly she's gone. So he panics and starts thinking. She admits she'd been asking herself the same question, guessing they were probably hired just off their track record, then shoots down her own heavy mood with a quick, She was just playing around. Then their talk got cut off as they were marched into a fancy room, only to find Cloakman standing there, waiting, and the woman's eyes widened as her question died in her throat. What kind of person is he? The man snapped around to face them, his stern features half hidden by that tall, high collar, and with a formal bow he thanked the three. Then he swung aside, and there she was, the real reason they came. A young woman with pale, braided hair and a quiet, solemn stare. Her name was Seal Asdela. When the dark-haired woman spotted her, her eyes blew wide with shock, because she recognized her instantly, and she knew Seal was tied to one of the story's main characters. The moment she realized what happened, her mind snapped to a grim vision, standing in the shadow of a looming skeleton, because she understood the awful truth. Right then, it was a straight-up death flag. In a bright room packed with towering bookshelves, a squad of adventurers gathers and finally meets the client. Seal Astella. She's got long, silver blonde hair in a braided crown, and even when she speaks, calm hangs in her eyes. Luke Hartman, light-haired and on edge, gets hit with a shock the second he sees her, name and face alike, and blurts out in total disbelief that she's from House Ducal of Astella and that she's got silver hair too, standing right beside him. His dark-haired female companion locks in with a razor-sharp, analytical stare. This bombshell lands like a thunderclap because in the kingdom of Diablo A, silver hair isn't just a style, it's the royal seal. And if it's all silver, not just a part, then you've got a rank even higher than anyone dares to imagine. The dark-haired woman takes it all in and realizes this proves Seal isn't just special. He's one of the royal family's most gifted and most prominent figures. Still, she stays stone-faced and appalled, staring at his total lack of respect, so Luke yanks her arm, drops to one knee, and snaps that she's being rude, because even a commoner like him knows exactly what silver hair signifies. Seal's outburst snaps the room in half, her eyes widen in shock. Yet the dark-haired woman only shoots a quick, dismissive look at Seal and blurts out, like it's obvious, what her hair color even changes. She steps forward with steel in her spine, boots thundering on the floor, and declares that since they're the ones the summons called, they've got nothing to be humble about. She drops onto the nearby couch, leans in hard, and snaps that if anyone's going to ask for a favor, they better bring the right attitude or don't ask at all. Luke's jaw tightens at her reckless audacity, and shock floods his face as he snaps that her stunt is basically a death sentence, while, behind him, another armored companion just watches. Seal looks downright entertained by the whole spectacle. She brings her hands to her lips, smirks like she already knew, and then says the rumors about the dark-haired woman were spot on. She leans in with a smug grin, drops the small talk, and asks if they should jump straight to the point. With that, she fires up her explanation, and the truth hits hard. A mysterious plague is tearing through a regional city, dropping its victims straight onto the streets. The dark-haired woman's eyes snap wide as Seal keeps talking, laying out their gut suspicion that it could be magic sclerosis, and when they say the name, it lands like a punch. Even as Seal admits this case has never happened before, so there's no way to know for sure. She nods and, right there, makes a formal plea begging the two of them to help figure out what this disease really is and get it treated. And when Luke hears her, his face falls with a heavy silence, because he suddenly realizes it's the same affliction that once tore through him. With a knowing smirk and her weight on the table, Seal tells them she went looking for them on purpose because she heard they were both experts in this exact subject. When the compliment lands, the woman's smile snaps into something colder because Seal isn't just some shelter princess. She's sharp and she knows things. After all, she's the one who cooked up the cure's formula and even bullied the Adventurers Guild into keeping quiet about where it really came from. Hearing that, Luke snaps his head toward his companion, his face blazing with surprise and hope, and starts to say, "Wait, if that's true, then maybe we can help." Right before he could finish, she cuts him off with one cold, blunt word, chin propped in her hand like she doesn't even care. "And I refuse." Luke freezes in disbelief and blurts her name Zeke, but she doesn't even look his way, snaps that none of this is her problem, and tells them to handle it themselves. She's not just joking. Her thoughts spill out, and you can feel her logic snap into place. She won't ride anywhere with someone drowning in death flags, and definitely not to a city crawling with a deadly disease. In her mind, a grim skeleton is looming right behind that clueless, endless sea of... Seal Estella smiled calmly at their refusal, like she'd already seen this coming, because the answer was predictable. And then she lifted her hand to warn them if they kept refusing, consequence would come knocking. The punishment hit hard. Seal snapped that both of their adventure licenses were getting revoked, and Zeke and Luke felt it like a punch to the gut, jolting up to their feet and shuffling in panic. Shock hit. Seal still wore that sweet smile, saying she was just learning the legendous style. But Zeke was boiling inside. This was the saintly heroine from the game, and she was using her power to snoop on people and throw out threats. Her stomach dropped as the implications slammed into her, turning the Seal into an enemy right now with the power she held would be a total disaster. Problem-cornered and drenched in sweat, she finally caved, grudgingly agreeing to take the job, and the second Seal flashed that grin. His smile stretched wider. She clapped in pure joy, chirping that she knew they'd. Once the arrangement was locked in, they finally tore out of the city and headed for what came next. Later, as their horse-drawn carriage rattled across the countryside, Luke seized the moment to bring up their departure again. Departure. At the end of their meeting, Seal bowed her head and thanked them so formally for accepting the job. That job memory hit Zeke hard, making him doubt the word graciously. And remember, they'd been threatened, so Zeke couldn't help questioning it. But Luke just grinned and said, "That's only because you're genuinely a kind person." Zeke kept smiling, swore she'd have taken the mission in the end anyway, and his bright confidence only made her shoot him a dark, furious look like, "Not a chance." As they finally head out, Seal turns to ask Stella to keep watching them, while a soft blush spreads across her cheeks as she realizes Zeke was the one who saved her life. Luke, clueless about her stormy thoughts, grins and tells his stoic partner that the two of them somehow share a wildly yobo. Bond keeps lecturing, pushing Zeke to grow into someone respectable like Lady Seal, and calling out Zeke's dismissive attitude like, "Is this how you treat your savior?" He admits Zeke is rude and hated, but Seal is an example. Turning to Seal, Luke shoots her a grin and asks if she respects him. Then he blurts out that her heroic fight to save her people makes her the absolute model of an ho. A noble name hangs in the air, Sin. Her smile crumbles, her face turns grim, and she steels herself to spill the truth of what's really going on. She tells him, "Sure, I've got royal blood in me, but I'm what you'd call an illegitimate child." Her bloodline screamed legitimacy, because the moment she was born, she came out with full silver hair, a mark everyone recognized instantly. And that's why she keeps insisting the ducal house is hers. Took her in, and out of nowhere she blurts to a stunned Luke that, because of where she came from, the family doesn't exactly warm up to her. Luke only manages to stammer, "I had no idea." Her eyes sharpen with stubborn resolve. One day, she insists, she'll earn the right to her silver hair, the royalty mark, and rise as the kind of noble everyone can brag about. And as she speaks, Zeke quietly replays some lore he once heard. To make that dream happen, she locks in with rock-solid conviction. She's ready to do whatever it takes. She shoots him a small, knowing smile and says his determination is absolutely strong enough to make it happen. Admirable then, their wild journey slams them into Apian, a buzzing regional city in western Etrin territory. But the second they arrive, Zeke freezes and gapes at the skyline, dread surging through him as he starts to wonder what he's seeing hits him like a punch. His mind snaps, and a brutal vision floods in skeletal figures, death omens hanging over the sick and dying in the streets. Horror crashes over him as he finally understands that the signs of doom have already begun. Everywhere then, the grim premonition turns into a grim, brutal reality. Asiol watches with worry as a woman's scream tears through the air. Her husband has collapsed. Another victim of magic sclare. With cirrhosis hitting fast, Zeke drops to his knees beside the fallen man as Seal yells his name. Her voice sharp, urgent, and barely holding together. Concern hangs in the air, and while he sizes up the situation, Seal snaps into action. Zeke can't believe it as she hauls that huge man onto her back with pure strength, insisting she'll carry him to the... She heads straight for the hospital, the giant, grim, epidemic patient quarantine facility built to swallow the city's crisis whole. Crisis inside, the tragedy hits like a tidal wave, and the sheer number of patients crammed into bunk beds is so massive that even the caregivers have been shoved past the breaking point of exhaustion hit like a brick. Later, Seal and Luke regroup, but Zeke's gone poof. Seal snaps. Where would he even go? And Luke just stares, stunned, mumbling the thought that makes everything fall apart that Zeke might have actually... He bolts away, then spots Zeke inside a building and charges right up to him, demanding to know where he's been. Zeke doesn't even flinch, just says they're stuck in a truly terrible situation. Affairs. He whips around, shuts his face into something grim, and demands to talk with her alone so urgently that she jumps, then blurts out if he's found. Leading her away from the others, he tells her the curse didn't feel like any normal disease, so he had to dig into it himself. Then he hauls out a massive cloth-wrapped find, pulled straight from the heart of... As he yanks the cloth away, the thing's true form snaps into view, this sickening mix of bone and dark paper, stabbed through with several long, crude nails, and with Grimm's iron certainty, he swears the city isn't plagued by some disease. It's hit by something far worse, a powerful curse. He corners her, demanding how she could have missed the curse's raging energy, and Seal drops her gaze, shaken, admitting she felt absolutely nothing. The sword. That realization hits him like lightning, clear, sharp, and undeniable. In the world he came from, Seal was a master of divine arts, the kind who could cleanse any curse. But here, in this reality, she's still pre-awakened, powerless in that moment, with none of. He gets it now, no one's coming to save them, so they've got to muscle through this crisis on their own, even with her divine power still locked away. Just as they're about to unlock it, their secret talk gets ripped short right as the street erupts in panic. The moment the crowd catches those chilling words, "cursed object," the entire mob whips around toward them, fear exploding across their faces. That realization hits the panicked crowd like lightning, and suddenly it all clicks. One guy blurts, "So that's why healing magic never worked," while another's face twists with rage and terror as he snarls, demanding to know who could possibly be behind it all. An atrocity, plain as day, those desperate eyes slam onto Seal, begging for a lifeline. "Is there a way to stop this?" someone blurts out, shaking with panic. Seal opens her mouth, flustered and helpless, and all she can manage is a frantic, "I don't know, not yet." Rising terror slams into him as he stares at the scene with a grim, unshakable gaze, while the citizens shout that they've hit their breaking point because the city's desperation now lands hard, right on their. He hauls it onto their shoulders, then swings his fist into the nearest wall. Crack stones splintering on impact, and with a brutal glare, he barks orders at the panicking crowd. He lunges out of nowhere, and the whole street jumps, citizens freeze, go dead quiet, and stare at him like fear has teeth. Uncertainty hangs in the air, but even with fear gnawing at everyone, hope leaks into the crowd. Someone insists that if a curse is really behind this, then Lady Seal has to be the key, since she's a master of the divine arts. As Seal watches, torn up with distress, the elderly man too looks on. Then the facilities director strides forward, invoking the legend of the silver-haired maiden, and his words slam straight into the attention of the stunned, half-breathed group. Desperate onlookers crowd in, and he tells the legendary story of a time long ago when the city nearly crumbled until the Estella family's daughter stepped forward and offered herself to save it. To the gods. The director says that ever since that sacrifice, people have treated the silver-haired maiden like a living shield, someone who can crush disaster before it strikes, and right then, the other citizens start remembering. Their faces lighting up with dawning horror. Dangerous hope detonates. Then his speech hits the peak when he jabs a finger straight at Seal, shouting that they've got one of those maidens right here among them. Leaving Luke and Seal, he snaps his gaze to the alarm. Then the director's accusation slams into the air like a verdict, and his finger drills straight at the stunt seal. He repeats his claim loud enough for everyone to hear, and there's a silver-haired, right here, right now. The crowd's eyes snap onto Seal, and then a brutal spike of pain hits Zeke's head like a lightning strike. He yelps, grabbing his temple as a flood of information crashes into him. With horror, he realizes something in his mind just clicked open, and now he remembers it all. This is the exact Seal backstory moment from the game. The second the truth hits, the crowd goes from murmurs to furious shouts, begging for a sacrifice. "The legend," they cry. "It's happening again." He locked eyes with Seal, and the crowd's sacrifice stared back at him like a warning sign. Then one critical piece snapped into place, and suddenly it hit. If this was the setup, getting chosen as the sacrifice was exactly what would trigger her divine powers to awaken. Arts practitioner. Even knowing this, it did nothing to calm the panicked screams of the citizens flooding the air, because he already knew Seal was supposed to survive if he didn't lift a finger. Then a nightmare vision jolted through him, a skeletal thing locking her down with iron grip force. His eyes blew wide. Wait, if she was really meant to live, so why? Because the truth hit him like a nightmare. An enormous skeleton clutching a panicked Seal over a roaring crowd, and the moment it clicked, his stomach dropped hard. Seal's death flag wasn't fading at all. It was getting bigger. Seal's ambition blazed like wildfire in her chest. She swore she'd become a noble people could truly be proud of, and she was ready to do whatever it took to make it real. The moment her resolve hit the real world, a desperate crowd of citizens closed in. and they dropped to their knees, begging Lady Seal to save them, praying she'd turn herself into a sacrifice for everyone's sake. Seal froze in stunned silence. Luke's face twisted with horror, and Zeke just stayed cold, expression unchanged. The air turned heavy with their heartbreak, every breath filled with silent sobs and desperate prayers, like the whole room was breaking at once. In the middle of the chaos, one thought snapped into Zeke's mind like a lightning strike. This was the perfect moment to strike. He stepped forward, and his voice sliced through the chaos as he spoke straight to Seal, reminding her of what she'd said about becoming a noble. Everyone could truly be proud of. The armored, hooded man pounced on it on the spot, insisting this was her moment to finally prove she deserved the people's respect. Seal went utterly speechless as the pressure hit all at once, coordinated and relentless. He kept his eyes locked on her, pressing the point that she had to figure out what she could do to make it happen. His words lit the crowd on fire, and the villagers erupted into cheers. Fists shot into the air as their desperation snapped into one clear, unified demand, while Zeke watched it all unfold with a sharp, flickering satisfaction. The armored man seized the moment, telling Seal that Zeke was right and barking orders for her answer. Then Luke couldn't take it anymore, screaming Zeke's name like it might break the spell, and Zeke finally turned, slow and deliberate, to face him. He tore over to the armored man and demanded that Zeke never meant it like that, or what? The hooded guy just stared back, shocked by the boy's furious burst. Just as the argument started to spiral, the facility director stepped in, his voice slicing straight through the tension and threw the armored man an ultimatum they'd have until noon tomorrow. He warned him to never, ever lose sight of that deadline. The armored man's face went tight, and his eyes narrowed like he'd just been trapped. The armored man locks eyes with Seal. Then, seeing Stella's desperation, he shouts at full volume that only she can save their town. His plea hangs there like a storm warning, and the Seal flares as everything clicks into place. She admits Zeke's words were cruel, but she's dead sure he wasn't telling her to become a sacrifice. While she wrestles with that terrifying thought, Zeke clocks her struggle from afar, then pushes her in his mind, begging her to think, to search for what she can do next. Her silence hits like a push she can feel. Seal's eyes snap wide as it finally clicks. He's right. With her courage finally locked in, Seal steps through the midnight streets, lantern in hand, determined to figure out what she can do, starting with the plans she'd been saving, so she goes right back to the director to talk again. She marches up to the massive wooden door, but right before she can touch it, a voice bursts out from inside, and she instantly knows it's the attendants. She squeezes, peeking through a crack in the door, and catches everything: an attendant's asking if the sacrifice is going off without a hitch, and a long, light-haired woman saying, "Lady Seal announced she's calling a divine magic user into town to heal the patients while she hunts down the culprit." The conspirators hate this news completely. That long-haired man who helped whip the crowd up earlier spits out his fury, demanding what happens next after he went through all that trouble to set everyone off. Right nearby, the facility director listens in, not missing a beat. A hooded man speaks with total calm, tells everyone to stop panicking, and lays out the next move he'll slip into the ducal house tomorrow as a messenger. Claim divine magic users are almost unheard of and can't be called up for 6 whole months, and watch as desperate citizens erupt in uproar. With a smug grin, he needles Seal for trusting the ducal house's power, scoffing that they'd never lift a finger to help. Then Seal hears it and gets hit with pure shock and disbelief. She jerked back from the door, the conspirators' words crashing down and sealing her worst fear. This was a full-on scheme to slap the curse onto the story, then dump her as the sacrifice in the first palace. Their voices kept pouring out from inside, dripping pure scorn. They sneered that she was delusional, laughing at the thought that a commoner's daughter, who just happened to be born with silver hair, could ever dream of being accepted as a noble. The brutal truth hit her like a punch to the gut. She staggered, turned, and walked away from that door, the reality of her situation tearing through her like shrapnel. Tears tore down her cheeks as betrayal crushed her to the core. Then she just blurted, "What the heck have I been doing?" and watched her resolve crumble into pure, gut-wrenching despair. Behind a door that just slammed shut, the meeting ended in silence. The man in ornate armor spun on his heel and vanished. His role in the conspiracy finally checked, at least for now. Time being. He ditched the facility director and left the hooded man to stand there alone. The two locked eyes smirked without a word, and a dark, wicked understanding slid between them. As night crashed over the town and long shadows slashed across the rooftops, the dire situation kicked everyone else into motion too. A young guard clenched his jaw with pure resolve and swore he'd never let Lady Seal be sacrificed, because if he could track down every cursed object fueling her affliction and smash them all, he could end this crisis by himself. Zeke Legias wasn't the only one hunting for these things out in the darkness. He slipped forward with a cold, razor-focused look. Sure, the kid he knew as Zeke was out there chasing the very same items too. The guard's hunt came up empty. He slammed his fist into the railing and roared that he couldn't find a single cursed object. While up on the rooftop, unseen, a shadowy figure kept its eyes on him. "Move!" He stayed hidden in the shadows, watching the young guard's search get ripped apart when a hooded figure shot forward. Grabbing him and yelling that he was the one wrecking his cursed objects, the guard had zero warning and could only freeze in pure shock. Shock slammed into the scene. The accusation hung there like a blade, and the guard couldn't stop wondering if Zeke was the one who'd been hunting those cursed objects all along. Huddled in the shadows, Zeke watched the showdown, face locked tight, nothing giving away what he felt. Rage tore through the attacker as he snapped that the guard wouldn't stop his curse. No, not now. Black, corrupt energy churned around his blade. Then he shot forward with a savage roar, demanding the guard shut up and die. He froze where he stood, couldn't move a muscle, as dark tentacles wrapped his arm and his sword. The attacker smirked, saying the guard might swing a decent blade, but he was helpless against magic, especially brainwashing magic, and the guard screamed in horror as his own body kept moving on its own. With the guard fully in his grip, the attacker sneered and taunted him to just end it while the guard fought the magical compulsion, his own hand yanking his sword toward Guy. With the blade inches from his throat, panic slammed into him as he begged it to stop. Then, right as the tip was about to break his skin, Zeke, still watching, muttered, "Good grief," clearly annoyed. In that instant, jagged crystal ice shards burst up from the ground, cracking through the curse's dark tendrils in one brutal, sharp swipe. Crackle when the curse's last sparks finally died. He burst out of the shadows and stared down at the freed guard. Then calmly demanded how he could call himself a partner while getting wrecked by something so pathetic. Opponent. He blurted out Zeke's name, eyes blazing, thrilled. He could move again. Then the guard said it plain. Zeke had smashed the magic flow. He shot a glance back at Zeke, cheeks a little hot, and muttered that if Zeke was really going to hunt cursed objects, he should have just invited him. Meanwhile, the hooded attacker just stood there, stunned, trying and failing to wrap his head around how Zeke had shattered his. In his spell, he spoke in a calm voice and basically told him, "Curses are just another kind of magic." Then he gestured toward that guard, someone who couldn't even sense the flow of magical energy, and said he would only... He stood there beside the guard who was finally free, sword thrust forward, and with a fearless grin he declared it was time to launch their counterattack. To begin then, their opponent laughed it off. The masked man scoffed, convinced their odds were dead the moment his dark magic started to surge, shadowy energy ripping through the air as it began. In the blink of an eye, massive tentacles packed with suction cups tore up from the earth and wrapped around both of them, and the attacker's roar hit so hard from afar that it felt like adding just one more person to the brawl would make them rethink everything. Nothing stopped the cold intent in his eyes as he laid out his real plan. He'd make them kill. Right then, like fate hit a button, the young guard's face went blank. and he lunged, swinging his sword straight at Zeke. Zeke snapped his blade up to block the sudden attack. He watched his spell lock in, and the attacker's eyes flared with wild joy as he snarled, "Now kill each other." They fought back and forth, but his victory didn't last. Then, a sudden wave of power exploded, tearing the dark magic apart, and the attacker staggered back, choking on shock. Cry out stunned, the masked man could only stammer in pure disbelief, while Zeke stared back in contempt, ripping into the so-called crude technique like it was nothing but brainwashing. And an absolute, he broke it down for them. True brainwashing is delicate magic that Thug's clumsy spell might bend the simple guard next to him. But it didn't even scratch someone like him. The attacker fumed after being cut down and changed his plan, demanding how Zeke would survive a physical dark magic assault, then fired off a fresh spell, Dark Gravel, hurling a barrage of shadowy projectiles straight at the recovery. Covering guard, he darts aside and dodges the dark volley like it's nothing, then surges in close with razor-swift precision until the magical pebbles crash and shatter harmlessly on the ground. Around him, everything tightens, his lightning strike hits, and the hooded attacker crumples to the ground. Defeated. The guard looms over him, and the man finally admits it when it comes to raw physical combat. The guard is his superior, his equal. Before the guard can pry for answers, Zeke's voice slices through the tension. He says he forgot something. The beaten man's eyes flare with terror. Then he locks in, rage burning as he demands to know why the curse was unleashed. Blood erupts from his body, and in one last desperate burst, the attacker slams his hand to the ground. Bam! And a glowing magic circle snaps open under him, flooding the area with a sinister light from far away. Seal and Luke gasp in terror, instantly seeing the signs of some summoning magic hits, and the circle detonates in raw power, blasting the attacker back like they got slapped by thunder. Then a monster rips out of reality, a hulking goat-headed beast with a sickening tentacled arm. Seal stares in terror, shouting that it's exactly that creature as it looms over them. A cursed demon. Zeke's face tightens as dread hits him, because this is the exact moment that was meant to wake Seal. They're trapped against the worst enemy imaginable, and Seal panics, shouting at Luke that all their skills won't save them, only divine magic can drive this thing back. Right as she speaks, the cursed demon erupts with a deafening roar, and a deadly ball of energy crushes itself into existence in its open maw. Seal, Estella, sits alone on the steps, tears burning in her eyes, cursing her own stupidity as she realizes no matter how she's born, someone like her will never be truly welcomed just for having silver hair. Her mind drifts right into the cruel whispers from the townspeople, remembering how they planned to sacrifice a silver-haired maiden to shatter the curse, and she spits out a bitter scoff, knowing they'll never feel a shred of gratitude. That painful truth hits her like a wave just like that. They'd be relieved to be free of her. Asab slips out when she clamps a hand over her mouth, and the tears finally break loose. A brutal crash erupts outside, shattering her despair. In an instant, she whips her head up, eyes blazing with pure alarm. She bursts onto the balcony, eyes locked on the city lights below, and freezes in pure horror. Far away, a massive explosion tears through the night, blasting a thick plume of black smoke skyward. "What on earth is going on?" she blurts out, voice trembling as dread sinks in. Out of the chaos, a nightmare monster crawls into the world, a goat-headed demon with a twisted, grotesque arm and whipping tentacles smashing through buildings and blasting the streets with sheer destructive power. Amid the wreckage, Zeke Legias charges the beast and drives his blade into one massive tentacle. Clang! But his holy arts only scrape the thing like it's made of steel, and his frustration boils as he realizes his job is just to stall it. Right nearby, the young guard Luke screams at the panicked citizens, yelling for them to back away while he warns them of the deadliest danger, even as they sob and shout in pure confusion at the chaos spiraling out of control. With Zeke locking in his position, he flicks a glance over his shoulder at the stampeding crowds, and something far off snags his attention. The seal bursts toward Luke, shouting his name and demanding answers, and Luke spins around shocked, then blurts out that he and Zeke already tracked the sorcerer down and pinned him in place until the guy yanked out summoning magic and unleashed the demon before they could take him. He screamed at everyone to bolt, warning that only holy magic could stop that summoned cursed demon, and Zeke, cold as ice, measured the moment like a blade, realizing this kind of crisis was a rare chance even if it could get him killed. He realized this desperate fight could be the spark that finally awakens Seal's hidden talent. Then, a monster screamed so loud it rattled the air, and its grotesque tentacle arm snapped through the sky, driving Luke and the terrified townspeople into desperate cover. The creature lunged with its mouth wide open, barreling straight at the scrambling civilians. Then Zeke snapped his arm forward, roared a single command, and I swear, a brutal wall of jagged ice erupted straight from the cobblestones, blasting up a crystal shield that slammed the demon's attack to a screeching stop just inches from the people. With the monster pinned for a heartbeat, he snapped his rage onto the stunned crowd, barking at the little guys to clear the area, then shoved them to their feet and make them run, while Seal watched, breathless, as he seized control of the chaos. She bolted to escape, then froze when she realized she was running the wrong way, while Citizen Zeke agents dropped to their knees and piled praise on Fell, thanking him again and again for keeping them safe. Their gratitude barely had time to settle before it snapped into panic, then straight accusations. One man jabbed a finger and shouted that the demon only showed up after Zeke arrived, and the next guy piled on, calling him a walking curse. Zeus froze mid-step, completely thrown by what the crowd was shouting. Then Zeke's voice popped up right behind her, claiming he'd finally tracked down where she was hiding. With a grim stare, he stepped in and confessed that he'd barely kept the demon at bay, but his barrier wouldn't hold for much longer. Stunned by the shocking timing, Seal could only blurt out his name. He stared at her like he was trying to see straight through her. Then, Seal, his voice dropped low and serious. "Tell me, don't you feel anything different inside you?" His question hangs there and Seal just freezes, staring back like she's lost. "What are you even talking about?" she blurts, eyes wide with pure confusion and sharp unease. Her doubt doesn't last. Nearby citizens start simmering with impatience. One guy slaps the label Jinx on her, and another storms in, yelling that if she's really a mage, she'd better stop freezing and start tearing the monster down. He keeps his eyes on her, and a bead of sweat crawls down his temple. His plan is collapsing, and he knows it. The missing piece is something crucial because her power should have ignited by now, and this has to be the final hidden key no one's found yet. That grim thought gets crushed the moment he spots something worse. An enormous skeleton cloaked in a wicked, dark aura towers over the rooftops, and rage bubbles inside him as he realizes the death flag is now hanging over everyone. His eyes narrow as he sizes up the skeletal behemoth, and then he spots it, one huge crack ripping across its ribcage, and he can't help but wonder what it's hiding. Right then, the cursed demon smashed through the ice wall, and the whole crowd screamed again, one begging that he can't possibly have more left in him, while another snaps, questioning how strong their so-called protectors really are. Their panicked accusations finally slam into Seal. Her frustration spikes. She whips around and yells that they need to move faster and handle it themselves. He whips his head around, his voice razor cold, shutting down their complaints like they're nothing but noise. And then he asks how they can talk like that when other people are risking their lives for them. Seal looks over, totally stunned by how brutal he's being. She clamps a hand over her mouth, totally stunned by what he just said. And he barrels on, asking if she really thinks a noble's job is to baby the masses. Then he declares he'd rather be the one who kicks them in. He swivels away and pure contempt hardens his face. Then he shrugs and says he couldn't care less about those pigs. His cynical words smacked into Seal Estella. She froze mid-breath, then crumpled to her knees on the cobblestones, staring like her mind had gone blank, while that cursed demon kept tearing through everything nearby. A passerby gasped, "What did you say?" "And Seal?" Estella stammered out an answer as the horrifying truth finally clicked. Honor. With a sting of shame, she finally saw it. Her hunger to save them wasn't pure at all. Somewhere in the middle of all that hero talk, she'd been chasing their approval, not the salvation itself. The thought snapped into a brutal truth. If there was no praise waiting for her, then what was the point of saving them at all? At all, this selfish drive was a total betrayal of the noble person she swore she'd become. And as she clenched her fist in sheer frustration, Luke Hartman watched, worry swelling fast, yelling out. He slid her name out like a knife, then dropped a brutal order. They were ditching the city. He demanded her Lady Seal to guide the evacuation, and the command hit her so hard she couldn't even react, instantly wondering what in the world her role was supposed to be. Treat. A savage roar from the cursed demon shattered her hesitation, and in that split second her future snapped into focus. She was finally ready, she had made up. With a jolt of newfound courage, she snapped her sword up and swore she'd take the beast head on, holding her ground just long enough to buy everyone else time to flee this. In the city streets, she grinned, her silver hair would blaze in the dark, turning her into the perfect decoy. While Zeke pinned the creature down, she baited its eyes and bought the citizens a fighting chance to stay safe. Her selfless move didn't slip past a single eye. People stared in disbelief, praising her as incredible, and realizing her sacrifice would finally make their evacuation far safer, while Zeke watched from the sidelines as decision. He snapped up his own blade, and a storm of dark, swirling energy started to gather around it as he stared her down coldly, addressing her by a title that carried a brutal weight, "O Scion of Lazy." He tightens his grip on the sword, and the moment the voice hits his head, comprehension snaps into place. He knows it right away. The magic blade of Lag. His eyes bulged with pure shock as the sun revealed itself. A sudden revelation clicks into place now. He strides up to Seal, and she recoils, totally lost as he snaps, "What are you doing?" while he calmly tells her she's the last one. Key, with a steel-tight grip, he pins her in place and drags the tip of his magic sword straight over her chest, right where the blade's about to bite. Her chest. Luke shouts her name with panic blazing in his voice as the sword comes crashing down, smashing the glowing chain-like seal that had been planted there, not even touching her flesh. Then the magical chains snap apart, boom, unleashing a massive surge of power as feathers explode outward and magnificent wings rip free from their seals. Up she climbs into the night sky, glowing like an angel drenched in holy light. And every citizen below, including a stunned Luke, tilts their heads and breaks into stunned, breathless words utters. Zeke blurts out that someone sealed away Seal's power, and Luke remembers that earlier moment when Zeke cut off a stream of magic. Then he finally sees the link. Zeke then swears that Lagi's magic sword let him break the seal without hurting her body, and doing that took a mind-bending level of precise magic. Above the city, Seal snaps the power back into place, she unleashes her restored might, and a blinding shower of light erupts as she shouts the start of her. Rain hammers down silver drops, pelting the people and turning their suffering into relief. And one man blurts out that his sickness is gone. But those same holy waters burn the cursed demon to the bone, making it shriek. Agony spikes through the air as that purifying light blazes down. Watching the cursed demon's grotesque body crumble and vanish, Luke stares in shocked disbelief, realizing the creature was actually, as its cursed flesh burns away, the creature's skeletal core flashes into view. Then it shatters into a storm of fragments. Zeke snaps to his companion, explaining that the crack across the skeleton's chest was the missing clue he'd been chasing. He finally found it then. Zeke tilts his head up, and the sky clears, painted by a glowing rainbow, while white birds streak by. And with his voice full of wonder, he declares that this is the exact moment the legend of the Silver Saint is born. Seal's eyes shot open. Estella realized she was sprawled in a bed, and then an unseen voice breathed out in pure relief, confirming that Lady Seal was awake and safe. She shoots upright, muscles tight with pure confusion, and scans the strange room like it's hunting her. Then blurts out where she is and what just happened. Panic slams into her as the nightmare of the crisis rushes back, and she desperately demands to know what became of the city and the demon. The voice declares it was her Lady Seal who crushed the demon, and then they claim she even called down a silver rain that wiped the curse clean off the world. Seal just stares back in shock, like her own mind can't wrap itself around what she supposedly did. Elsewhere in the massive ward, other coma patients suddenly sit up and step out, roaring with joy as they celebrate their miracle comeback, and they swear every breath they have now is thanks to Lady Seal. She stares at her own hands, and a jolt of doubt crawls through her eyes wide, confused. Then she blurts out that she can't remember a single thing. One of the healed men drops to his knees in front of her, gently taking her hand like it's sacred, and he proclaims her the Silver Saint, calling Lady Seal a living legend of a paean. Her cheeks blaze with embarrassment, and she blurts out a frantic denial, saying there's no way she could have pulled it off all on her own. Then, like a blade through her confusion, one piercing thought snaps into place, and her face hardens with sharp worry as she rushes to demand where Zeke is. Just as she tries to push herself up, a gentle yet unbreakable hand clamps down on her shoulder and stops her cold. While a steady voice warns her not to go too far, she grimaces as exhaustion crashes over her in a brutal wave. She's stuck in the recovery ward, eyes glazed, while Luke Hartman stands right there, resting a comforting hand on her shoulder, telling her her exhaustion makes perfect sense after the insane divine magic she just used. Seal admits she can barely remember anything and that it all feels unreal in her head. Then she promises to walk you through what happened the night before, saying, "Sure, a few loose ends are still hanging, but she's convinced Zeke is handling them right now." Far from the city, a hooded man in armor bursts through the forest on a galloping horse, yanking the reins hard and swearing at his own bad call, still stunned that Seal really woke up and started using her powers. He remembers her angelic wings and dread claws at him. When he realizes she can purify more than demons, she can cleanse the curse itself, smashing every failure report in one blow. Then, out of nowhere, an unnatural chill slices through the air and jolts him straight to alert. A brutal cold blast slams into him and flings him off his rearing horse. He hits the ground hard, gasping in shock while a shadowy figure watches from the path, unbothered, like, "Looks like you were in a rush." The figure strides forward and boom, there's a young man with dark, bobbed hair in a long coat, brushing his fingers through his hair as his face stays ice calm, coolly asking the fallen rider why he's still there while the rider runs off somewhere. There, the armored man lies sprawled on the ground, staring up with sweat-soaked dirt smeared across his face and raw shock in his eyes. Then he gasps and blurts, "Zeke Legius," as he recognizes the attacker. With a hard, icy stare, Zeke presses him, demanding to know what he's doing there. He leans hard into it, grilling the man like, "Did you really buy that seals make sense nonsense?" Then straight up blames the ducal house for yanking the strings only for the armored guy to scramble upright and blurt, "I was just messing around. I never meant the ducal house orchestrated the curse." Zeke scoots in, eyes razor-sharp, and flat out says he only noticed someone bolting out of the city in panic and followed just to satisfy his curiosity. Yet it does nothing to calm the armored man, who starts sweating buckets under that brutal stare. A tense silence crushes the forest air, and the only thing you can hear is the leaves whispering as the showdown hits its breaking point. In the heart of Appian City Plaza, a armored man is caught mid-swing, frozen solid inside a massive, jagged shard of eyes that tore up the cobblestones beneath him. A frozen, jaw-dropping sight hits Estella like a slap because right in front of her stands Zeke in his older form, dead calm, telling her, "Yep, that's exactly what it looks like." and revealing it isn't the mastermind at all, just the operative who actually unleashed the curse. He snaps her attention to the captive's neck and asks, straight up, if she recognizes the tattoo sitting there. Seal leans in, staring at that creepy skull-like design, but she admits she has no idea what it's for, so Zeke snaps, "You're useless," like her question is nothing. He fires back that the tattoo is the whole key because the demon summoner wore the exact same mark, and he even checked it himself on the corpse, proving there's no way the death was the end. Doubt hangs in the air as the connection snaps into place and hits both Seal and Luke like a shockwave, with Luke starting to protest that even if Seal doesn't know. Zeke cuts in, snaps his focus back to the Seal, and blurts that he's sure her half-brother is hiding the truth, making her choke on a gasp and shuffle back in shock. Luke blurts out in shock as the idea lands, while a terrified Seal pleads with Zeke to stop before he marches on the ducal house. Yet Zeke doesn't budge, announcing he's going to gift them this beautiful frozen specimen. Luke insists it's not strong enough to count as proof, and Zeke just snorts at the idea like it's pure nonsense. Ignoring Luke's warning, he locks eyes on the Seal and barks, "Seal, deliver a message to my brother. Brother." She freezes for a heartbeat, stunned by the boy's message, then snaps back with pure defiance, telling Zeke that if her half-brother wants something from her, he'll have to come face her herself. Her confidence shatters the moment it clicks because the Adventurers Association's request wasn't real at all. It was a kingdom trap, a test to see if she was truly the kind of person they could trust, value. Zeke reads her mind and admits he tried to stay unnoticed by acting like some ordinary adventurer. But he's forced to admit it probably made him look even more suspicious in the end, remembering how easily he once tore through a unicorn in a past battle. He keeps going, spitting out impossible feats, uncovering a cure for magic sclerosis, slaughtering beast hordes across the northern plains, and pushing straight into the Legia's deepest secrets. Dungeonaire hangs heavy as he flashes a sly smirk and tells her straight up those winds make her impossible for anyone with power to brush off. And he swears that's exactly what he'd expect from the mighty House of Estus. Then he drops a jaw-dropping truth. He's one of the intelligence agency's hidden hands, pulling the kingdom's strings from the shadows. Luke, right beside him, stares in shock and blurts out, "Tell me it's true, was everything I just heard real?" Zeke shrugs off Luke's outburst, eyes locked on Seal, then demands the final verdict straight up, calling her Agent Seal. Seal starts to answer, and the words spill out. She'd been suspicious too. She admits it. She'd felt Zeke was up to something, but the truth of what he really wanted stayed like a total mystery. But everything shattered the moment she spotted him in the dungeon. He threw his own life on the line just to protect her. Staring at him with pure, heartfelt awe, she blurts out that his selfless acts finally became the noble image she'd been chasing her whole life. She finally decided this was the truth and the one she would swear to and report, her eyes locked on the grandest state standing before her. For her, but doubt gnawed at her because she knew the ducal house wasn't just watching. They were testing her too, and there was no way to know if they'd ever even bother to listen. Hearing her doubt, he snapped out a quick, sharp laugh and told her she was being ridiculous. Then he snapped her back to her new reality. She was the Silver Saint now, and the kingdom and her own family couldn't afford to look away. Those words hit her like a wave, stunning her for a beat as a shy blush crept up her chest. As they talked, nearby citizens huddled and whispered. One guy kept asking what Zeke was even telling Lady Seal, while another couldn't stop staring, shocked to see that demon child standing so close to their saint, muttering about how unreal it all felt before trailing off, had changed. He ignored the crowd completely, then turned and congratulated her straight away, declaring she was now a real maiden of a. Estella scoffed and turned slightly away, cutting the moment short with a sharp, simple no, as if none of it could touch her. Her face lit up with a bright, joyful smile as she said she'd finally found her own path to follow, while Zeke just watched her. Transformation hit, and he snapped back, "Suit yourself," then stared out over the city, while she clutched the seal to her chest and made a vow in silence she would follow the same path he'd walked. She kept moving. Her choice was already locked in while far below the Estella Ducal house blazed under the night sky, glowing like the life and duty she'd just decided to abandon. You're behind. Meanwhile, in a gold-bedecked office, this man slams his fist on his desk, seething. "That little wretch!" he hisses, furious that she tore through the seal he set and woke her up, and it cuts off right there. Divine magic. Yeah, he swore he could toss her aside without lifting a finger, but now he's finally clocking it. This whole disaster has only proved, and talent. His fist shakes with raw frustration. Lord Lagius was supposed to be a useless, corrupt fool. Yet Zeke Lagius, the one who helped Seal, looks like he's fully aware of their job as the kingdom's. Rage boils in his chest as an attendant marches up to beg for orders, and he clocks that Zeke is even chatting like he knows Lord Glance too. The man called Lord Actal swats away the fancy disguise theory and decides it's far more likely that Zeke himself is the... Then the truth hits he's Actal Estella, Seal's half-brother, and just like that, a fresh plan sparks in his head. Maybe they should try to win Zeke Ligeus over. 3 years went by now. The Grand Lagi is finally a state, and 15-year-old Zeke stands there in quiet thought, his face impossible to read. Inside, he finds Lord and Lady Ligeus grinning like the world's ending. His father bursts into hearty laughter and swears their joy is all because of Zeke, who just stands there, quietly soaking in how unreal their cheerfulness is. With a proud grin, his father breaks it down. Zeke's recent wins have shot House Ligea's name to brand new heights, and his mother, hiding a sweet laugh, can't help but say she's never been happier. He shuts his eyes and lets their joy wash over him, admitting to himself that he can't really fault them for celebrating. His mind spirals back to the original game scene. Zeke Ligeus had absolutely no hope of ever shaking off his villain reputation. He realizes every grind, every win, was never the point at all, just a ticket to one unshakable destination, his own death. For the past 3 years, he trained like his life depended on it, grinding harder and harder until he'd finally stepped into an adventure meant to lead him along the path fate set before him. His journey didn't just keep going, it pushed him all the way to saving the city of Apaean, a huge turning point carved into his fate. But everything's shifted now on the city streets. People talk about Zeke in a totally different tone. Someone remembers how he was accused of stabbing Lady Seal and calling up a demon, and how they'd usually twist his moves into pure villainy. Yet this time, it didn't feel the same. Elsewhere, Celestella weighs the fallout with a sharp stare after her backing. Zeke's reputation has somehow skyrocketed in public, and now she's left wondering what kind of massive ripple this surprise twist will unleash next. She stared in worry at all the new situations crashing outside her game knowledge, and with her choices pulling her so far off the original story, she even ended up saving 2 of the protagonist's companions. Her mind raced to every other weird anomaly she'd stumbled on the demon sword she'd never seen in the game, and the terrifying netherworld eyes, the power that could see your death coming. She could feel it. Some shadowy organization in Apaean was moving behind the scenes, and it wasn't anywhere in her predictions, not even close. So now she couldn't shake the dread that after this, the whole plan might spin wildly off script. Her thoughts got yanked to a stop when a maid stepped up in front of the giant doors and shouted that Lord Z had arrived. Inside the room, Lord Lagius snapped his gaze on him, wore a grave face, and told him, "We've got guests." Zeke's eyes snapped wide as he stared at the entrance hall, clocking the visitors' armored boots way too familiar and way too overdue. And his mind instantly raced to one terrifying thought: were they here for the seal? Yeah, those guests were Nightmare from the Glant survey team, and right beside her was Marx, the mage, standing there packed with luggage. Mia beamed at Zeke with total confidence, flat out telling him they'd just seen what House Ligeus can do, and they were there with a request made for him, right then. She told me that every few years, lords from every corner swarm into the royal capital for the Council of Lords, and their official request was crystal clear. They wanted Lord Zeke to stand guard and handle security for the whole event. Before Zeke could even get a word out, his father's voice thundered with fury. Sure, House Legias would show up for the council, but there was no way in hell he was letting his precious heir march into that kind of danger. Danger hits, he stammers, stunned while Magician Marks rages over the chance that slipped away. She grins anyway and sighs. What a shame, because guarding the royal capital isn't just an honor. It's the kind of moment that could have sent the Legia's name soaring even higher. Even higher right as he freezes, a bead of sweat forms when her words hit him, because Sage Glance himself made that recommendation. And now, everyone's whispering about it. This wasn't just a shot in the dark. It was a chance for the whole world to see Lord Zeke's brilliance. Nightmia's chiming adds fuel to the fire, saying it's a shame they're getting shut down, and Lord Legia can only grunt, clearly rattled by their crushing disappointment. His resolve snaps in an instant. He whips around, face blazing with fury, and shouts that Zeke has to defend the royal capital. After that shocking about face, he whips around and strides off, telling them he'll handle the conference prep details later. Once his father's gone, Zeke whips around to Mia and Marks, locking eyes with them. He figures if they went out of their way to nominate him, then this mission has to be tied to that recent incident in a... Mia stares at him, eyes wide with awe, because she can tell his inside is as sharp. She lays it all on the table. This is bigger than anyone wants to admit. The shadowy group that cursed Apian is still a mystery. Their plans are still hidden, and chances are... just chances they'll hit the conference where the king will be right there in person. One slip, and everything could fall apart. Reported now. Magician Mark starts piecing it together, and suddenly this clue hits like a hammer. Lord Glance's recommendation is real, but it's also an order coming straight from the ducal house of Astel. He wrestles with whether Seal Estela is really in on it, remembering how glued to it she seems and how hard his father blew up. Then clocks that backing out would have been a headache too big to deal with. Rage flares at the thought that everyone involved is an idiot until a cold realization hits. If this is coming from the Estella family, it might be a trap set by Seals. Brother, he froze mid-thought. One nasty realization hit him hard. The enemy organization already knew his face, and he'd been way too careless. He didn't even get the words out before his companions cut in. Mia and Marks locked eyes and flashed confident smiles because they'd totally expected this problem, and they told him, straight up, to just walk away. Leave it to them. His eyes bulged with shock then. Right as he doubted their readiness, Marks slammed a heavy case onto the floor with a brutal thud, declaring they were already fully loaded. They snapped open the case with a flourish, and there it was, sparkling cosmetics and tools spread out like a treasure haul as they grinned with unstoppable resolve. We're giving him a disguise. Guys, before he could even protest, their hands slammed onto him and pinned him tight. He started thrashing, and a sharp, alarmed cry burst out of him, caught mid-dead throat. Then their voices turned calm and comforting, urging him to relax, stop fighting, and just let them get to work. He had to wait, and they swore they'd only spot it once they caught something that had their hold on. Over in the countryside. Everything was calm and quiet. A thick stone bridge arched over a still river, while lush trees and wild, overgrown grass swallowed the banks. By the riverbank near that bridge, the young hero charged in alone, pulled his sword free with a sharp metallic whisper, eyes locked in pure, intense fury. He locked in his focus, then exploded upward, blade raised to the sky, and with one savage cry, "Kior!" he slammed it down, cleaving. As he tore out of arc, the impact hit like a thunderclap. His swing ripped a brutal trench into the earth, blasting soil and rock everywhere while he stood staring down the wreckage. Power. Van Freek, the young swordsman, slams his blade down with relentless grit, and water explodes in an arc off the steel, while Atri stands on the riverbank, eyes locked on him, soaking in his fierce resolve. Focus! He snaps his attention to her and shouts her name, and Atri whips around to face him, wearing that unreadable expression, gentle. He tells them that the moment he heard what happened in Apian, it lit a fire under him, because knowing a legendary adventurer like that exists meant he couldn't just sit around. As their journey rolls on, they cross an old stone bridge, and Atri leans in asking if Van's been grinding on his magic training too. Van nods, then says, with iron certainty, that he never wants to go back to that particular place again. Village. He suddenly remembers the day their trading company rolled into Alhai village, and she popped up out of nowhere, demanding answers like she was there for one specific reason too. He works for them, then he grins and praises her insane magic talent. Atri blushes and looks aside, saying that compared to one specific person, she still has a long way to go. Way to go. His fist clamps down on his sword's hilt, and he snaps that she should just wait, because he has zero plans to stay stuck at his current level. With a sharp glint lighting up his eyes, he slides his sword out just a little, then swears he'll carve his name into history as a swordsman, no matter what it costs. Atri looks up at him, her face saying nothing, but her gaze hits with a calm, intense focus as she takes in his declaration. With their resolve locked in, Atri steps up and announces the main caravan has finally hit the royal capital. Time to roll. Van throws up his hands and cheers, already salivating over the business chances with the Council of Lords and the big, grand adventure time. Atri and his companion thrust their fists up, locking eyes with shared grit, and roar their cheers as they finally arrive. The royal capital looms then. Their carriage blasts forward, rumbling toward the towering gates of their destination, like destiny is right around the corner. Spirito inside the walls, they're hit with the roar of a massive, buzzing main street, the kind that screams the city's famous for pushing back monsters by the endless tide. Invasions elsewhere, secret plans are being hammered out, and someone points out the brutal reality with so many groups showing up for the upcoming conference, every guard has to report to the Adventurers Guild first. A young man with a battered poledrone on his shoulder explains that the guild is neutral ground, so it's the perfect, no-drama meeting spot for everyone. Right then, an ornate carriage rumbled to a quiet halt on the cobblestone street. Luke Hartman, the same young guard, steps out and confirms they've finally arrived at the Yo. He glances over his shoulder, jaw set, barking a warning to his unseen partner to stay alert because an enemy might be lurking just beyond the view. Somewhere right on cue, a formal, heeled shoe drops to the ground from the carriage, and a hard, steady voice cuts through the air, saying one single word, "Zeke, no." A stern young woman in a dark, formal dress snaps out, stepping forward with a steady hand. And she doesn't call him Zeke at all, she calls him Lady. Brynhilder snaps that idea down as pure nonsense, and Luke Hartman, her guard, can't stop staring, stunned by how gender-swapping magic and a bit of makeup can conjure a face like hers, though his mind keeps snagging on the thought that trails off behind his tongue, unfinished. Before he can finish his sentence, she strikes a confident pose and declares loud and proud that the outcome is only natural. With a form that was that good to begin with? Luke flashes a smile, thinking that even with the new look, her personality is still the same.